Game begin.
What on earth is a global digital event, I hear you ask? Well, allow me to enlighten you. This event is a gathering of hot gaming content that you would have been able to see at PAX West in Seattle, PAX Australia in Melbourne, or EGX in London in September, before COVID changed the world in what, let's be honest, is a storyline from a video game. In fact, it's bound to spawn many post-viral games in the near future. We'll be hunting through the city streets, crafting masks from animal hides, and all while still on furlough. Instead, you can sit at home and take in all the delights of a truly global event, enjoying the food from your kitchen at a reasonable price, and have a seat guaranteed, all day. Amazing! At this event, you'll be able to poke around over 200 booths on the show floor, and have a deep dive into some great curated content you might not have seen before. And it's all in one place, like a show. Just have a click around and discover stuff, then click further and discover more stuff. The show floor, or Expo Hall if you're speaking American, is just part of the event we're presenting. On top of the Expo Hall, we also offer you some of the highlights of any PAX or EGX show. Tons of brilliant panels. You'll be able to visit the site, paxegx.com, and navigate your way via the show floor to the massive schedule. It's like a Glastonbury festival of gaming, with massive headline acts and loads of interesting things to watch in the meantime. There will always be something great in there just for you. The Daily Wrap from Virgin Media, presented at 5:30 UK time each day. This will be brought to you by a mix of the brilliant teams at Outside Xbox and Outside Extra, Eurogamer, and Rock Paper Shotgun. They'll highlight the hotspots from the show day that's just happened and look forward to what's coming up next, all using boss-level broadband for gamers. Meet up on Discord. We all know that hanging out with your friends is a really important part of going to an event. Meeting people you already know, making new friends, and hanging out. The Left Field Collection is a must-see for attendees looking for the new, unique, and challenging works going on in games. This is a platform for titles and projects that like to do things a little differently, and promises to always have something interesting to check out. With over 100 indie titles at this year's show, there's going to be tons to discover. There are loads of other features, including speedrunning, cosplay, some interesting limited edition retail opportunities, and board games, with loads of videos from our partners at Dicebreaker. Exclusive event merch! What with this being the first time we've done a standalone digital event, this merch will be very limited edition. Show off to your friends with a fetching new hat, at a distance of 2 meters or greater, or grab something special for a loved one or hated enemy. The shop's live now, and you can find it on this site or by searching for the EGX store. And if it's PAX merch you're after, you can search for that too. That's a taste of what to look out for while you're strolling around the digital show floor. There's loads of hot gaming content to come over the next few days. Some of it's live now, and some will be going live later, so be sure to check out all the booths to find out more. Oh, and don't worry if you miss a panel. Everything is going to be uploaded soon after to the EGX YouTube channel. But, you know, always better to see it first, right? In the meantime, here are some of the things to keep an eye on.
Hello and welcome to this panel, Career Paths, Different Roles in the Industry at EGX Digital 2020. This panel was organised through BAFTA Crew, which myself and all the panellists are a part of. My name is Sophie Knowles. I will be the host moderator of this panel. I am a 3D generalist. I work for Playdio, which is a mobile game studio in the UK, in London. As a 3D generalist, I do a multitude of things, animation modeling, rigging, and all that jazz. Someone else want to introduce themselves? Chris.
Thanks for that, Soph. So my name is Chris Phillip. I am the event coordinator at the Tentacle Zone by Payload Studios, and I'm also the co-founder of Game Anglia. With my Tentacle Zone hat on, we put on events for our residents in our co-working space in London, and now remotely for the last several months. And basically my role is to help the residents achieve the best they can be by bringing together industry experts and making sure that we do relevant talks, and also I manage the community in terms of communicating with them and making sure that they talk to each other and do knowledge transfer, which also fits well with my other hat where we create events for the young people and students in the east of England with the Game Anglia hat on, to help them, help young game developers kind of like achieve their best and get started within the games industry.
Great, Katie, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Katie Ellis. I'm marketing lead at Joggerfish. My role is kind of not just marketing, but also publishing too. So it covers everything from when we first bring a game in, pre-announcement and everything, working with them to make sure that the game development goes smoothly, that the game happens, I guess, and also then right through to the marketing of it to make sure you've heard of it. There's 1,000,001 stages in between that, and it's often not always what you'd expect. It's definitely a role with a lot of different hats. I guess a bit like Chris, we do events as well, social, product management, lots of things I'm probably forgetting. But yeah, that's about it.
Kirsty, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kirsty Gilmore, and I'm a freelance voice director and casting director for games and also a sound designer. Most recently, I've been working as the voice director for Destruction All Stars for Lucid Games, and also for a number of titles through Pit Stop Productions, which I can't talk about at all. As a freelancer, I work for a lot of different companies. My role encompasses everything from liaising with different studios and companies about what they're looking for in terms of voice actors and also performance and motion capture actors, although I'm more of a voice director. So through the casting process, but also through to the end product in terms of voice direction and directing the voice sessions. Also I do a lot of liaising with producers and with writers. I'm involved in a lot of different steps of the process, talking to people about the best way of capturing and implementing the best voice and performances for their games. Outside of the games industry, I also work as a voice and casting director for animation and audio drama, and also as a sound designer across a load of different areas, but mainly at the moment for audio drama. That's me.
Great, thanks everyone. So we've got a good range of different jobs here. I wanted to ask, we all know kind of like games are made that you start with pre-production, you get concepts, you get a prototype, you get production, whether the game's made, you get sort of like post-production, like bug fixing, and you get sort of post-release support. And you also have so many game roles that are kind of out of the sort of like classic production line of things. Whereabouts in all of these are you most situated, or are you Katie, let's start with you.
Okay. I think mine's probably more I guess it really varies because it depends on what point we sign a game as a publisher, or from our development side, as Chocofish is also a developer, it's right from the inception of someone decides, let's make a game about this, or this would be a really cool thing. So it's very much a journey throughout the whole game production, and obviously throughout the rest of its life too, not just when the game launches. You've got to be there to see it through for the next foreseeable years while it's still relevant. It totally depends at which point we can kind of come into different parts of the game's life. From a kind of marketing standpoint, it's always awesome to be with the game for the full journey. Sometimes when it's like not even announced, or when there's just a very like small cool idea that somebody's thought of, because that's when you can really shape things. You can help shape the narrative in terms of how you present the game, the copywriting, everything like the logo. All of that is part of presenting a game to the world, but not also to players and press, but most importantly to like partners, like talking to Nintendo or PlayStation, presenting that game. So publishing and marketing is kind of all part of that massive journey. But equally, a lot of people come in just before they want to launch their game. They've done all that work, they're right at the end of it, and they just want somebody to kind of help and be like, come on, can you, I've got this awesome game, I just want people to hear about it. How can I kind of get it across the line? So yeah, it's a really interesting role because you just see so many games at so many different stages. You might be like Kirsty was hinting at before, working on a game which you can't talk about for a long time, and you've kind of put it under wraps for years, and you're part of that journey that people don't see like 70% of. They see the last 20% of it. So yeah, it's a very wide-ranging.
That's so interesting. So be able to see everything in all its little stages. Chris, how about you?
So events, as Katie mentioned as well, are a really, really big field, and they're quite wide. So you could be, generally you're going to be helping people. That's that's why I do it, and that's what I like to do. Now, what form that's going to take is dependent on the type of your role, and it's going to depend a lot on the people who you're working with. So, for example, we together with some of the team at Payload Studios, we put together social events which help people kind of like get together and help teams really mesh properly, especially when you're working within a co-working space. What you want to do is get people to know each other, because that way you can foster collaboration, right? Teamwork and communication are really important within any team of game developers. And then so that's a more social aspect of things. But then you can also have a look at some of what I do and some of what the Tentacle Zone does as a part of business development, and as a part of key skill and knowledge development. So, for example, just the other day we had a chat about with an external developer, someone who we knew from experience, about putting together free-to-play games for Steam. So we got together and we chatted about best ways to work with your community on Steam, best ways to develop monetization strategies which don't feel predatory for free-to-play games, especially on Steam, where you have certain characteristics of the community. Another week, we might have a chat about what it's like to publish games in China and what processes you need to go through in order to get there. Another week, it might be that we talk about leadership and how to scale the challenges of scaling up of your company as a company founder. So it's helping people achieve their best potential through knowing people, or at least knowing where to find the people that know how to answer those questions and surmount those challenges, and then getting everybody in a room, in a virtual room in this case, and helping them share that knowledge. Because a lot of the time game developers won't, even if they have like a lot of knowledge, they won't necessarily know how to help each other. So that's where also I come in as a facilitator to help them talk about those problems and not veer off the path too much. So I guess that's kind of where my job fits in the grand scheme of things. In terms of where it fits within the production cycle, as Katie said as well, it's all over the place. It might be that you just started your company and you don't know how to make a business plan, and we help you out. Or it might be that you have a very successful game on Android, but you want to port it to PC, and we know the right people to help you to help you start that process. So it's it doesn't necessarily fit in a specific stage. It could be anywhere.
Yeah, it's really great. No, I've certainly found games events very helpful my whole career, whether it's finding people or just getting extra knowledge and learning about things that I never knew from people just talking about their own specialty. Kirsty.
Well, a little bit like what Katie and Chris said. It kind of depends on the project, and it depends on the game. I would say that I get involved at the point when a studio decides that they want voicing for their game, and that might be something they decide on very early on. If it's a game that's particularly character driven or particularly narrative driven, and they've decided that they definitely want their characters to have voices, so that might be quite an early decision. Or it might end up at the other end, where they decide that they want to add voiceover, they want to add performance to the game quite late. I would say that the majority of what I do, I've worked on both ends of the spectrum, but especially when I'm involved with mocap and performance capture, it's usually happening earlier on. I'm usually involved with earlier on in the process, because that's something when you decide to invest in mocap and performance capture, that means that there's a lot more moving pieces. You have to get cinematics involved often, you have to get animation obviously quite heavily involved, so that becomes much more of a combined effort. But if it's a game where it's maybe just narration or it's just barks of some sort, then that might be something further down the process, because it's not as they do. And I find that a lot of the character development, a lot of the game development has happened before they add voiceover. So, I mean, it's definitely in the production, mainly production, with a bit of pre-production. I'd prefer to be like, I think any kind of creative, I'd prefer to be involved in the process earlier than possible, because I think it's, if you are going to give voice and performance, if you are going to have those elements in your game, then it's important to understand what you need, what's available for you within your budget, and what you would like, what you can, you know, what will voice or performance add to your game, what roles might need it, what roles might not, and what sort of what you're looking for, in terms of, and what might fit best for your game. So yeah, I would say that it's one of the things about voice direction in games is that it's still quite new within games, just to have a voice director and to have a we've had acting in voice games for a long time, but to have a role where people go on and are actually voice directors. We still have a lot of people who are sound designers who direct, who are writers who direct, and that's all great. But to have people who are dedicated voice directors and dedicated performance directors in particular is still quite new. So we're still, I think some games that I go to, if it's an established studio and they've worked with voiceover before, then they're very much like, this is how much we think we're going to need. You know, they've got a broad idea. These are the kind of characters we think we are going to voice, and that will expand, contract, mainly expand, usually expand, as the game goes on. But there are definitely studios where they're like, look, we've never used voiceover before. We've no idea. Where do we start from there? So it's it's still something that's still new to companies. They're still not sure when they need it. So that's when you get a lot of like really last minute, oh God, we really want to add a voiceover element to this. Is 2 weeks enough to capture 20, to capture things? Is that going to, kind of thing, which is fine. So I would say, yeah, it varies. But the bigger the game is, the more committed they are to, like, the more they know that they're going to have voiceover performance, and the earlier then I will get involved in the process, I would say.
Do you find generally studios are getting better at bringing you in early, or is it still just like some bring you at the right time, some it's a mad rush, or?
They're getting better. I think what's happening, which is a good thing, is that game players are being more picky about performances. And that has a knock-on effect with studios going, oh, maybe we should invest a bit more time and money in getting people, actors, and not just our mates, to voice stuff. And then that kind of feeds on, kind of connects down the chain, where they go, oh, well, maybe we should think about bringing in a specialist who can actually deal with that sort of thing. So I would say, yeah, the more demand, the more people expect higher standards from games, then yes, I get a bit further involved. But as we all know, games is a really big wide world. So there's a massive spectrum. I think that I'm finding that people are more understanding, or should I say more willing, even if they don't really understand what I do, they're more willing to listen to a voice director or performance director's perspective and what they can add. So I find people are a bit more like, oh yes, actually you are an expert on this. They're more willing to listen. Whether or not they bring me in earlier in the process, yeah, kind of depends on the game. But I know they appreciate the role more, which is definitely a good thing.
Yeah, I think, definitely appreciation is needed for all of us, and not being brought in and expected to do miracle work. I've had some similar experiences with the animation work I do, where I'm brought in right at the end, because you can get some really great placeholder animation, and much like placeholder voice, it's great until it's not great. And then they bring in the professionals, and hopefully I can fix it. So myself, as a generalist, which basically just means I'm a jack of all trades, so I do a whole load of different things. Normally I'm working, in the sort of heart of production, doing animations or modeling or whatever it is that the particular game and job needs from me. But also generalists are very good in pre-production, making prototypes, because generally generalists are good at jumping between different things, whereas people who are more focused on one thing aren't. You definitely need those people who are just the one thing, because they're going to be much better than me, who is going to do a little bit of everything. Yeah, but yeah, and yeah, I guess it also as a generous, depending on what I'm doing, it really depends on when I'm needed. But normally, yeah, production, and normally in small teams who don't particularly need a dedicated modeler or rigger or animator. So yeah, let's talk about our jobs again. I kind of already started on this. Sort of like any misconceptions about our jobs, our roles, and people making assumptions that aren't quite true. Maybe because what our role is slightly different in another industry. Yeah, if people always ask you a question, you're always tired of answering because they always ask the same thing. So Chris.
So on my side, I'm never tired of answering questions. I'm always happy to answer questions, especially if those questions come from people who want to know more or want to go into to come into the games industry. In terms of misconceptions, I think the biggest one that I've had is that people who work events or these types of support roles, as they're usually seen, don't necessarily come from the games industry, and I think that's probably the biggest one. On my side, I come from like game design and game producing, and it just turned out that I really like events because they have a shorter lifespan than a game. So I can produce an event in 3 months and deliver it, and that's really cool. As opposed to working for a few years on something and then having it be canned by somebody way above me in the decision chain. And I think that that's probably the biggest one. So yeah, people who work in events, they are passionate about games. They might have worked in games as well. Certainly, so the Tentacle Zone also has an exhibition arm. That's how it usually that's how it initially started, way back in 2015 or 2016, and the person who started that or who's taking care of the shows like EGX, the Tentacles on EGX or at Insomnia, Rob Kinder. He's our head of publishing. He's our publishing director. Sorry. So he knows games, he breathes games, and he works very closely with indies, and that's what allowed him a lot of the contacts and a lot of the, at the end of the day, product development and service development decisions that were made in order to support indies and put together the Tentacle Zone at events. And he's still doing his day job as a publishing director in addition to putting together the Tentacle Zone at shows. So yeah, that's probably the biggest one from my side.
Great. What about you, Kirsty?
I think probably the biggest misconception is that you don't need a director, a voice director, a performance director on games. That's probably the biggest one I've come across, that people say, oh, can't you just, do you need somebody who's actually going to be dedicated directing it? Can't the actors direct themselves? Or can't just one of the producers do it, or one of the writers do it? And I think while people who are very much, writers can make excellent voice directors, and sound designers can make excellent voice directors, but the assumption that anybody can do the job, I think, is the big thing, because a lot of the games industry doesn't really, there's just that misconception as to what acting is and how to get a good performance, and the fact that if you want nuanced performances and you want to bring a character to life, you do need somebody there to shape the performance. It's not just a case of chucking the script at the actor and getting them to just say the words in a nice way. So I think that's the biggest misconception, is people saying, well, do we really need it? And so I spend not that much time anymore. I'm fortunate at the moment actually to work on games where that's already established. They've already established they need one. But a lot of the time, I think it's when I talk to indies who are like, do I really need a voice director? And I would say, well, how important is the voice performance, the acting, for you to tell your story? So if it is important for you, then you need to invest in someone that is going to shape the story for you. And each of the individual actors, even if you've got say 2 actors on a game, or you've got like 800 characters in a game, and 80, 90, whatever, 100 actors or whatever you have, the voice director will hopefully have an overview of what the game is and how the voice performance fits in the story, and they can give context. You can't expect each of your individual actors to know how the game fits together. You can't expect them to know that in this particular, you can't expect them to know what barks are. You can't expect them to know how gameplay dialogue differs from cinematic dialogue. And that's one of where you need an overall view of somebody to come in and go, actually, do you know what, we can't, the way you've said that line there isn't going to work, because that's a piece of information that at this point in time the player doesn't know. So you can't give too much away at that point. We're going to have to redo. We're going to redo that in a way that suggests it, but doesn't say it. We don't want to hint at it too much. Or right at this point, you're being very confessional about it. This is the big dramatic moment, so we need to put a little bit more into it. And so this line is pretty much exactly the way you just did the previous line. It's just a different branching option. So we're going to use exactly the same intention. It just depends on what the player chooses to do. And you need that to guide. I mean, a lot of actors do play games, which is brilliant, but a load of actors don't. And, I deal with actors who come from theatre, who come from screen acting, and they don't, game and voice acting to them is another job, but they don't understand, they say, can I get a script? And I'm like, no. Not the full script anyway, that's thousands of pages, we can't give you that, but I can guide you through and tell you how your bit works in it. And so I do a lot of explain, when I do have to explain it to people, I think that's probably the biggest misconception, just how much value a voice director gives to a game and what their role is. I don't think there's any questions that I get tired of answering for people. Like Chris, I'm really happy to talk to people who want to get into games. I would say occasionally I get a little bit tired about answering questions from actors, because they just ask, how do I work in games, which is the same, so that's a question with a whole lot of different things. But just in general, if developers want to say, how do I add voice, what do I need to do to put voice acting in my game? How do I get actors? Where do I find them? How do I really, really need this specific voice. How do I find them? Very, very happy to talk to them about that. I don't get tired about doing about that. I guess like all of us, we get, you get a bit tired of people are saying that your job's not necessary, which I do get occasionally. And that's always a little bit wearing. But again, I would say, how much value do you want the performance in your game to have? If you are willing just to have, if the voiceover doesn't mean that much to you, then don't invest in a voice director. If you want your voice acting to bring another element to your game, to the gameplay experience, then invest in someone who's going to bring the best out of your actors, who's going to connect all the dots, who's going to give you a cohesive performance across characters. Yeah,
super fascinating. Katie.
Yeah, I think there's loads of common misconceptions in marketing and publishing. I think it's widely misunderstood. But, in terms of marketing, people often think, it's just throwing money at Reddit, like ad spend. Lots of people just think, tweet something. Marketing is just tweeting, right? There's a lot of misconceptions about that. Publishing even more so. Publishing, the big thing is, what do they even do? What's the publisher even do? Don't they just take a cut? And that's, I think I could probably do a whole talk separately on the small little things, that and many different things that involve marketing and publishing. But I guess the big answer to it is, marketing isn't just tweeting. It's how you say it, it's how you deliver it, where you deliver it, who you talk to, why you're talking to them. It's many multifaceted things across many different platforms that don't always suit each game. You could be doing something on Twitter which doesn't work for Twitter. It should be on Instagram, but that's just social. Marketing, it could be so many. It's all about branding and everything else. Publishing, lots of people think it's just, they just get age ratings. That's a big one. People just think marketing is talking to Peggy and slapping a logo on a box, rather than the long progress of working with a game to make sure that it's bug free, that it plays well, that people enjoy it, like giving developers honest feedback, working with them on a process about how you position it on a store, making people interested, talking to press, talking to influencers, talking to platform holders, also getting age ratings. and other bits like that. Yeah, I think it's one of those things which totally depends as well on what a game team needs. So some people, for them, it might just be they need money, and that's fine. Some people just need money from a publisher and want to do everything themselves. But publishing is so much of just taking work away from developers. They can just develop their games. They don't want to be thinking about legal contracts or planning their social campaigns or sitting on Photoshop making really pretty GIFs. They want to be actually making the game. So that's a lot of I guess a big question is what do you do? That's the most common question. I think the other big question I get a lot at game shows in particular, Chris might have this, is I released my game like a month ago. I didn't get very many sales. How do I market it? And that's one of my favorite ones. And I normally say, she probably have looked at marketing about 10 months ago, maybe longer. But yeah, I think a lot of people, that's the real big benefit of thinking about your marketing campaign is I think a lot of us have been kind of hinting, is getting in early and making all of those different facets of game development earlier in the process, really thinking ahead to what you need and what's important for your game. It might be your game is a really fantastic one that's really good at word of mouth, and actually you don't need to do massive prep, or maybe it's really story based and you don't want to be sharing too much information like too early on. So yeah, it totally depends.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think there's always that rather annoying discussion that comes around every now and again of like who counts as a game dev and who doesn't, which I think we can all just like roll our eyes at, because if you're help the game in any way and help the devs and help it coming to fruition so that we can all play these wonderful things, you're a dev. Like it's not just programmers, artists and all that. Yeah, I guess for myself, the complicated thing about a generalist is there's lots of different types of generalists. I think when people are studying at university or whatever, they're told to be T-shaped, so they know a lot of one thing and a bit of two things. And generalists are normally octopus-shaped. So we're always a sort of like mangle of so many different skills, probably because I have a very short attention span. I'm just like, I could learn this thing now. So I guess it's sort of like all generalists don't do the same thing. I'll be contacted about a game that needs something, and I'll look at it and think, they'll say, can you do this particular thing? I'll have to really think like, yes, and just wing it. It's probably bad advice, but just say yes and wing it. We have Google. So we've all been in the games industry for a little while. How has everyone's the role of that they've been doing in their career changed? Like personally, like going from job to job, like has it evolved from starting at one thing? Like Chris, you said you were making games and then you moved on. And also the particular role you do, how has that changed over time? Like, is there new software or new tasks, or you're expected to do something that you weren't always expected to do? Well, Chris, let's start with you.
So, yeah, I took a very roundabout way around the games industry. So I studied games at the University of Suffolk. Then I worked as a game designer for Ubisoft, which was really cool to see, exactly what you were talking about, a type of environment where hyper specialization is encouraged. So if you want to know the guy who does all of the mountains and the snow in Ubisoft, there is the one guy who does them all. It's the same with like vehicles. There's a whole studio that does vehicles, and it's a Ubisoft studio that does just every vehicle has been touched by them or has their systems. And then I moved on to be a product manager with a company that was leveraging a lot gamified apps a lot in transport. And while I was doing that, I also worked on a couple of indie games as a producer, because product manager and producer have a lot of overlap between them. And a lot of the time that means just making sure people are on track and that everything works as it's supposed to the deadlines and to the budgets that you have. And then that's at during that I also started Game Anglia. Basically, I had a lot of time. I had so much free time. That's no longer the case right now. And then I moved on as a product manager within an influencer marketing company, which gave me a very good understanding of working with stakeholders and working with the types of very early stage products and technologies. Like we were trying to do some really fancy stuff around analyzing influencer um, soft skills just by looking at their videos and analyzing their videos, and like the modularity of their voices, how much they smiled, how good their video quality was, and things like that, which was really cool. And then I started the job that I'm currently in with the tentacles and with Payload Studios. So throughout this, I learned a lot, and I can honestly say they all kind of fit into each other. From my side, where I am now, what helped me the most was that I ended up meeting a lot of people from a variety of fields. So if I want to bring somebody in to talk about leadership, I not only have access to the leads that I worked with or with the studio heads from the indie studios that I collaborated with, but I also have people who worked in tech and other similar adjacent fields. And that really helped in terms of how I've seen the different disciplines evolve. I would say from a game design point of view, it helps a lot if you're technical, if you can make your own prototypes. And that's something that we weren't necessarily taught at uni, where it was just like, oh yeah, you're going to be balancing sheets and that's it. Or it wasn't even the case at Ubisoft, where it was basically balancing sheets and making PowerPoint presentations, and that was like your whole life was basically Microsoft Office. But then as you start going into small companies, the types that Katie works with, for example, it's really useful if you're a technical designer and if you can actually put together a prototype in Unity, if you can work with blueprints and things like that. From a producer point of view, I think and product management, Katie can also share her thoughts on that. But I've seen a lot of emphasis on actually being able to motivate teams, being able to shift your priorities from a product mindset where it's like, we need to make this game by date X, and I don't care if I need to like have you all here working overtime and hire 10 more juniors and just burn them out and then throw them by the wayside. And it's got into a much more people focused mindset where it's like, well, let's make sure that the team can deliver, because that it's their idea, it's their product, it's their game, and that's where the value is. It's within the people, it's not within a bloody spreadsheet, although it's really good to know spreadsheets as well. And then lastly, from the events point of view, I think there's been a lot more focus on the visitor or personal customer experience and accessibility, and that's great. That's throughout the industry, and that's really great to see that. So when we were doing the last Game Anglia event that was in person, which was in late 2019, we focused a lot on making sure that the experience was as accessible as possible, that we had everything closed captioned as much as possible, that we then took the videos and put them up on YouTube, and then try to signal that to signpost that as much as possible. And we thought a lot more about what the whole experience for the students, for the customers at the end of the day was going to be, although the students themselves didn't pay, but yeah, we see them as customers. That's kind of where I'm at, if that answers your question, Saf. Sorry, it was very roundabout.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, Katie, do you want to go?
Yeah, I think you said about talking about the whole journey, so I'll try and remember. I guess I started off in a weird way as well. I actually went to uni to do history, so completely unrelated. I just liked writing, really, and wanted to do more of that. So not really particularly channeled at that point. But throughout uni as well, I really enjoyed games and writing. So I also wrote for some websites and like gaming websites, like Push Square and Nintendo Life, sorry. And so yeah, I was kind of already at that point building contacts, making relationships, just practicing writing really. And copywriting is one of those things which is incredibly helpful for so many different jobs. And just being able to eloquently write emails is a very underrated task and skill. I guess after uni, I then I started working in events as well. Actually, I worked in a gaming events specialist kind of company. So we produced events all around the world for PlayStation. So things like E3, Gamescom, Paris Games Week, EGX, all those kind of things. And that also was a lot of emailing, and but also time management, planning, budget management, creative ideas. You know, you've got to really like you get kind of briefed on a game and you have to kind of realize it in a kind of an experiential and like really visual, amazing way, and something which creates the best for the demo. So maybe you have a demo where it's not actually that hands-on yet, but you've got to make it really feel like the player's immersed in playing it. And so all kind of those many different facets. And then at that point I decided, you know, I love games, I love producing these events, but unlike what Chris was saying, I was heartbroken that I would produce an event and then it would be torn down at the end of a weekend, and you'd see all my work being like shredded and thrown in a recycling tip. And I just wanted to be involved more. I was like, you know, I get to make these amazing relationships with developers and publishers and stuff like that. And I get to see them through different stages of their release, producing these events for them. But I never really get to leave my mark on the game. So that's when I started looking into publishing and marketing, because, you know, it's kind of selling your game, but in a different way. Events are still involved, but it's all of those same transferable skills. Like, how do I take the best and most exciting elements of a game and portray it visually, or, you know, convey information to the player in a very short space of time that you've got their attention. So it's just a kind of reworking those skills in a different way. I guess now a lot more of the focus, I think Chris was talking about, is actually looking after teams and kind of being a calming voice or excitable voice for what they're doing. You know, a lot of the times, you know, they just kind of want reassurance in what they're doing. And they might send you a build and they'll be like, oh, I don't know if it's going anywhere. I don't know what I'm doing. And you play like, this is awesome. You know, and kind of like, you know, being there to kind of as a voice, because so many of these teams are just very small groups of people who may never have made a game before, or they don't have a lot of experience on their going out on their own, and this is their big dream project, their one thing they want to do. So being part of that journey and not just doing all of like the product management and marketing side, but being more of a person, you know, and communicating with them is so important, and I think really not talked about part of publishing and marketing. I guess how things have changed, I think definitely there's been a big change between classic, what you see as publishing in terms of like the big studios, massive budgets, crunching, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And now it's a lot more chill. There's a lot more boutique agencies and publishing teams and partners, people who just want to help out and work on cool projects and do small stuff, not be as complete ownership of things as they used to be, which is awesome. I think things are moving a pretty positive direction in that point of view. I think marketing, it changes all the time. Like, you're constantly having to adapt to new trends, and like 1 minute there'll be like a new feature that Steam bring out and you have to like jump on that, learn everything about that. You know, if the algorithm changes on YouTube, oh my word, you gotta research all of that. So there's so much going on all the time, which means there's never a better time to jump into marketing, because you'll always know more tomorrow than you did yesterday, which is a good thing for new people joining, because it's not like those old people at the top have anything on you. It's, you know, they don't know. They're what they knew as like golden is probably no longer relevant. So it's always a good time for younger people to jump in.
That's fantastic. Chris, sorry, can I ask how long we've been?
I don't know. This doesn't have a timer.
Oh no, okay. Because we've got 50 minutes. Chris, do you want to finish us off?
Yeah. Just roll all that together. I also took I'm really heartened to hear that everybody kind of took a slightly roundabout journey into games, because one of the things that I really love about game development just in general is the fact that it does feel a lot more open than some more traditional traditional kind of entertainment or media industries, in that kind of way. I came from a sound design background in post-production, and then I worked in sound for a long time, and moved into across broadcasting, post-production and broadcasting and radio and lots of different things, and theatre, sound as well. And then I moved into voice directing about 7 years ago, doing mainly commercials and narrative stuff to start with, and then concentrating more on character voice directing about 5 years ago. And I would say that that's this kind of non-typical path into voice directing is very, very common. I've talked to, like I've said, a lot of people get into game voice directing because they're writing, and they are writing for a game and they're asked to take on the voice direction part of it. Or they're a sound designer for a game, or an audio director, and they're asked to take on the voice direction part of it. And that's very common as well. I would say that in terms of things that have changed amongst the industry, changed about voice direction and casting direction in games, is that people are taking it more seriously now. And like I said, people are asking opinion of voice directors and just valuing the job more, which is really, really great. So in terms of people wanting to get into the industry, my big thing really, I do get asked this by directors quite a lot. Oh, I'd really, really love to work in games as a director. So they're theatre directors or film directors or audio drama directors, radio drama directors or audiobook directors. And they say, I really, really I'd love to work in games. And I think the big thing for me really is, firstly, have an appreciation of games. It really, really helps if you play games. I know that sounds really obvious to all of us, but for people coming outside of the industry who think that games would be a cool thing to work in, a lot of them don't realize that actually having an understanding and appreciation of games, playing games and understanding how all the different bits fit together is incredibly helpful. Because in my day-to-day job, I talk to writers, I talk to producers, I talk to publishers occasionally if the publisher has a specific opinion about what goes on with a specific character and how they sound, which does happen. It's slightly unusual when it does happen, but I have had publishers talk to me about how a particular character sounds because they're really invested in it, and that's brilliant. So I would say one of the things that having direction experience and directing characters, directing actors is absolutely paramount as a starting point, particularly. And we have a lot of directors that I've worked with who come from theatre backgrounds and come from screen direction backgrounds. But I think understanding how games is different, and games is interactive, and it's branching dialogue, and almost all other forms of entertainment are linear. So you sit there as a participant and you watch, you don't participate, you're just watching it. And you watch a film, you watch TV, you watch theatre, you listen to an audio drama. You're not participating in it in that kind of a way. So understanding how games, what it means that a game is interactive and what a gameplay experience is, and how everything it can feed into everything else. And I have a massive, the more I work in games, the more appreciation I have for writing and for narrative design, which is different, and for what the sound designers do and all the different aspects of sound, and what the producers do and what the art departments do and what animation does and cinematics. So all of that feeds into my daily job, and every day I learn something different, and I go, oh, well, that's really useful to know that they do that. So I would say anybody wanting to get into it really wants to just understand games, go out there and play them, but also, game people are really active on Twitter. Follow Twitter threads, follow your favorite people. I always encourage people who want to get into voice direction, voice acting for games, to follow writers, because they're going to be writing the words that you're going to be saying or directing. So it makes sense to understand what's a bark, what is gameplay dialogue, what is branching dialogue, how does that affect me as a director or an actor. So I'd say in terms of the way things have changed, the only other thing I would say is that you have to get really used to, as a voice director, particularly in current times, to not seeing your actors. And that's a massive shift for a lot of directors who come from cinema, screen acting or theatre acting. I would say I at the moment, 100% of the direction I am doing, the actors cannot see me. And about 50 to 60%, I cannot see them. It's entirely voice only. So there's a chunk of it which I'm doing for one particular a couple of particular games where it is I can see them, but for a lot of it, you were relying on voice-to-voice communication, and that is a bit weird and strange for a lot of directors or people wanting to go into director. And that's for people who are very reliant on visual, as a lot of directors do. That takes a bit of a shift as well. So I would say get tuned into voice stuff. Understand that that's a thing. And the only other thing is just learn to work at speed, because games are really fast and you do not have time. Learn to work at speed. Because we don't have the sort of time that you take to rehearse a film, or God forbid, a theatre production. We've got 3 weeks of rehearsal before you put it on stage. It is go and go and go and go, and we have to capture 2,000 words today, you know, in this 3-hour session or what have you. So it's kind of so yeah, I'd say that's where does that there's some kind of sum everything up. Does that cover everything for me?
I think that's fantastic. All right, I think that's all the time we have. That was a really fascinating chat. Thank you, everyone, for your amazing insights. I hope people out there found this very useful. I know there are other careers talks happening at EGX Digital 2020, so please check out all the other videos, and thanks for listening to us.
Hello and welcome back to EGX Digital. I am really pleased to be running this panel. My name is Johnny Chiodini, and today we're going to be talking about the history of Arcane Studios. This is the first time we've really been able to interview the Austin office and the Lyon office at the same time, so I'm very pleased to be joined by Ricardo, co-creative director, and Dinga, who's the game director at Arcane Lyon. Hello, greetings to both of you.
Hey there.
Hi, Johnny.
So again,
thanks for hosting us.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for agreeing to sort of be on this panel. Arcane is 20. That must feel weird.
It is weird to be at a studio that has been around that long, and this is the longest that I've been at any studio. On top of that, and I haven't even been there all 20 of the years. I've been there, I think, almost 11 now. But yeah, it's weird to think about that.
Definitely we can feel to me it's odd because it's almost the same as Ricardo. I arrived it will soon be 10 years actually, very soon, so it's a nice synchronization to 10, but it's the same. Not only does it feel like quite intimidating to be in a studio that has been around for so long, but also those 10 years have passed like this. So it's
I mean, obviously the studio must have changed quite a bit over the years that you've been there. What are some of your earliest memories of working at Arcane? Is it strange to look back on how things operated then versus now?
Well, I'm sure Dinga's experience is pretty similar, but when I first started at Arcane, it was very small. I guess smaller on the US side than the Lyon side, even, because when I joined in, I think it was 2009, there was just like 7 people in an office. It was like Raph, Harvey, Anthony Huso, I think Quinn was there, Stephen Hurd, our lead programmer, just started. It was a very tiny handful of people, and then there were a video conference, little carts set up with video conferencing monitors on them in like 3 or 4 spots in the office, so people could, and they were always on, so it was like a portal to the folks in Lyon, and it was just in a very, very small office space, all, like 7 or 8 people in there, and it was like that for a good year or so before we started ramping up on Dishonored. So where, fast forward to now, we've got 2 studios, one in Austin, one in Lyon. Both of them have full, teams, tons of people, tons of great people. So it definitely feels a lot different now. But it also, at the same time, it still feels like the same spirit. We're still making the same kind of games. We're still talking about the same kinds of things. We just have a little bit more of a, we went from like a small gang to like now we have an army.
Yeah, and it's also funny because I think one of the things that slightly changed is the spirit of the people who joined, because at the time where we joined, not a lot of people knew Arcane. It was like the people who loved Arcane, loved this kind of games, followed Harvey or Raf's career, etc., etc. So, but now we get people who come who have played more Dishonored than we do, who has like are super fans. They know what Billy Lurk likes to eat at tea time, etc., and we don't. So it's that's the thing that is that has changed a little bit, but the passion itself, yes, I agree. I totally agree. Is very much the same kind of energy. But this time, each time someone new comes, we have this feeling of, oh, they know what we're about. It's not like we have to explain and rediscuss all those things as much.
Yeah, it's funny when somebody like brings something up that you invented, but that you can't even remember. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I can't imagine how strange it must be to come into a climate where people are coming in as former consumers of the products. When you've been there since the days before, that was really a phenomenon in the hiring process. But to go back slightly, you talked about kind of there still being the same spirit and the same kind of ethos today that you had back when it was two offices with a portal on a cart to connect them. Could you just talk a bit more about that ethos and that spirit and what you understand about it and what makes it distinctly Arcane, I suppose?
Well, I think over the years, there's a bunch of little bitty channels we could go down, the distinctives, but over the years, I've managed to kind of boil it down to two things for me personally anyways. One is we've always focused on making games that let players be part of the creative process, right? Players in any game that we make, players always get to improvise solutions. They get to approach the problems we present them with creatively. So that's one thing. And then the second thing that we've always focused on since the beginning is in-depth world building, like creating a space for the player that just has a lot of depth, a lot of reality, so that they can really believe that in the world that they're set in. Of course, there are a bunch of little specific things inside those two pillars, but those are the two things that I think we've always held on to, and that we'll continue to do so going forward. What do you think, Dinga?
Yes, I definitely agree. I would say that there is also maybe as a not as much as a pillar, but a filter to approach those two pillars, which is the spirit of experimentation. We experiment, we try things, we go back, we kill our babies several times around, sometimes necromance them weirdly, but but there is this whole spirit of experimenting a lot, even on things you think questioning yourselves, re-examining the same question we asked on the last project, just to be really sure that it is still relevant for a number of reasons, like this project is different, the technology has evolved, do we still have the same limitation, like all those things. We really try to not set ourselves in a comfort zone, even when we are making, like for instance, when Austin made the Knife of Dunwall DLC, it was supposed to be just a DLC and expansion, but the amount of rethinking even core things like having a voice protagonist.
That's a good point.
We always try to make experiments, take risk, and surprise and delight.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. we always say that our legacy or our heritage is immersive sims. So that's like in our bloodstream, that's in our DNA. But Dingo's right that with each successive title, that's where we came from. So it's always evident in the game. But we also try to rethink things and add something new to the mix. Another good example of that would be Moon Crash, and even Deathloop now. Just adding in mechanics that you might consider to be the staples of other genres, like roguelikes or adventure games or whatever.
I mean, I would love to kind of rattle through some of those titles and talk about kind of the process and the babies you killed then sort of resurrected as we go. But if we could just for a moment wind the clock all the way back. I appreciate you might not have worked on it, but obviously Arx Fatalis was the studio's first title in 2002. It must be interesting to look back on that now. Do you see sort of seeds of the company culture that sort of then blossomed in later titles in that game?
Well, I mean, just looking at exactly what Rick expressed here, like a reverence for the immersive sims, because that's where we come, and we can clearly see, the Ultima Underworld influence and root for this game, like the homage, spiritual successor, even status there, but also innovation and experimentation with some things like the spell casting that was, not a frequent mechanic in games, to say the least. So even with and then it's not even talking about the fiction of it, because the fiction is very very different from Ultima. So there is definitely some if you went to the ending, it's a bit more cosmic than you might think. I think it exactly exemplifies that, putting the player in front of the experience, like giving them a lot of freedom, ownership on their experience, etc. Build on a strong foundation of the genre we love, but also experimentations, innovations along the way, and also trying to have fun doing it. I think you can feel in Arx a lot of a lot of love from the team at the time. It's very evident.
Yeah, I would say, just to add like a concrete example, would just be one of the things that is cool about Arx and is definitely influenced from even previous games like Ultima Underworld, like Dinga mentioned, is just the completeness of the space itself, right? The coherence of the world, like it's all internally consistent. It's a big dungeon. It's a big interconnected dungeon that the player can retraverse and revisit and sort of explore at their own pace. And so you can see that that specific quality like translated to games like Prey, and even in the level design of particular levels within Dishonored.
Mm-hmm.
So Ricardo, just indulge me for a minute. So could we say that Prey is more, some people said, is it Dishonored in space? Some people say it's a system shock, but could we say that it's Arx in space in a way?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we internally on the team, you're totally right. We used to call it like it's a big space dungeon that we were building. So yeah, 100%.
Cool. Now, obviously, I think it's safe to say that it was Dishonored that really put Arcane on the map in terms of gamers' consciousness and kind of the amount of attention that was being paid to the studio. So I guess this is probably a good time to ask what you think are the key things that make an Arcane game an Arcane game. What is it about Dishonored specifically that kind of really embodies the ethos of the two respective offices?
I think it's a vast question. It's a vast question because, for all intents and purposes, it is, I'm saying that sometimes almost, a bit humbled with what we accomplished at the time, with the team size we had and the challenges we had, but I think it's a very, very vast game, like with a lot of things to it, not only gameplay, but also world building, art direction. It is it's almost like in technology. It's almost like if every single of those, components of the game was pushed to the maximum we could possibly do at the time. So that's why sometimes when I'm trying to answer a question like that, it's a bit hard to know where to start.
Sure.
But I think I think it's probably this. I think to me the what makes Dishonored special for me is the how how can I say that? How thorough the exploration was in all of these elements and how it translates into the game, in the gameplay, in the world building, in the art direction, in the technology, the sound department also. It's really a whole that is very harmonious. Like there is a lot of harmony with all those components, but at the same time, just listing the elements on paper, I'm not sure you would exactly get what it's cuisine basically. It's not, you see what I mean? It's cuisine.
Yeah.
You have all those ingredients.
It's a stew. A chili.
It's canned eels.
Cassoulet.
Yeah, it basically congregates in something that is very unique. I think better than the sum of its parts is something every game developer is striving for. But I think that's a good element. So to me, what makes it truly Arcane is it is true to the lineage again of the company. It is also doing a lot of new things and daring things, especially at the time. And at the same time, it has a very strong identity. I think if you talk about the art direction, for instance, as a big component of Arcane games, I think this is the game where, because if you look at Arcs and the Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, you can already see the game design pillars, you can already see the technology, you can already see a lot of elements, but the art direction really took its wings at Arcane with this project. It's really ours. You cannot see a screenshot of Dishonored, not know that it's Dishonored.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
It's a number of things.
Yeah, if I were to cite just one of the ingredients of the stew that Dinga is talking about, just as by way of example, and this is harkening back to the sort of like two pillars that I was talking about before, like giving the player a bunch of the ability to be expressive in the game. On the design side, one of the things that we do is we don't reward, we have this sort of principles that we don't reward the player for how they did something, just that they did something, right? So like we don't give out loot or experience points or story bits or whatever because, just to use a silly example, like we tell you like there's a guy in a room that you need to assassinate, but we don't care how you get into the room. We don't reward you for picking the lock versus going in through the roof versus climbing through the window versus going in through the sewer tunnels beneath. Any of those things are valid, or blowing up the wall, or whatever the case may be in a particular game. Instead, we just tell you what the goal is, and then we give you a bunch of really cool tools to play with that are relevant to that goal, and then we just turn you loose into the world and say go for it. And we reward you for accomplishing the goal, but not for how you did it. How you did it is totally up to you. And hopefully we've done a good job of teaching you how to use all our fun gameplay tools and stuff like that. But that would be a distinctive, I think, in our approach to game design. And I think that's super evident in Dishonored, right? We give the player like, here's blink, here's possession, here's stealth, here's a whole bucket full of really fun tools to play with, and then we just say, and here's your goal, you need to get to this location, you need to assassinate this target, you need to capture this thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've really hit the nail on the head in kind of identifying that an Arcane game is a number of components, but those components have really been pushed to the greatest extent possible. But what does an idea have to have in order for you to say, yes, let's make that? How do you differentiate between something you intuitively know is and isn't Arcane, as it were?
Briefly, I would say, I would just mention two things right off the bat. One is, of course, it has to be something that feels like it's appropriate for whatever the setting is that we're working in. It has to be dramatic, and it has to feel like this fits inside of the Prey universe, or this fits inside of the Dishonored universe. Although there is a lot of leeway for shaping almost any kind of idea to make it fit, right? But the second thing, and it's probably more important, and this is the thing where the stew comes into play, and it takes a while for it to cook, is that it has to have a lot of meaningful connections to a bunch of the other game mechanics in the game, right? So take something like the mimic ability in Prey. That has a lot of meaningful connections to a bunch of other things in the world. It's meaningfully connected to the fiction, of course, but it's the ability. It gives the player the ability to transform into physics objects. Well, in order for that to be cool, there has to be a shitload of physics objects all over the game, right? It's also an ability that the creatures have, so they can do the same thing you can do. Actually, they can do it first because you learn it from them. It's connected to, you can combo it with all kinds of other powers that you already or could potentially possess as well, right? You could turn into a physics object and launch yourself through the air with the blast ability. So all of our game mechanics sort of go through this filter, this iteration process where we come up with a power or a tool or a weapon or whatever the case may be, and then we begin. Of course, we already have in mind a lot of ideas anyways, but at the iteration process we begin to discover all the meaningful connections it can have to other systems in the game so that it has lots of depth, right? That's what I would say anyways.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the core thing, and it's the same for a concept art or a piece of concept art, for a prop or a narrative idea, a background narrative idea for a character or something like that. Overall, I think the live or die is, does it fit with what we are doing? Does it fit with the ecosystem of the game? If it's a narrative idea, does it make my gameplay more meaningful? Does it actually might influence my take on the events that might make me change my playstyle just because I learned this optional bit of lore about this character? Now I don't want them dead, and I want to find a way to get rid of them without killing them, etc., etc. So I think it's the important part. The easier ideas to cut are the ones that have the less that are less interlinked with the rest. It's here, it's nice, it's nice little thing, but would we miss it? Not necessarily. Does it make the rest more interesting? Not necessarily. So those ones are easy to cut if we have to make a choice. Some of them still live in the game, but overall, I think it's the fitting in this ecosystem is on a number of different ways, on a number of different levels. And then I think there is a few there is a few things that are just, I guess, sometimes company culture, based on what we did and a number of things. And sometimes when you propose something that is, like, for instance, Ricardo will probably laugh, but if I was to propose an animation where if you land, when dropping from high, you would land with your fist first toward the ground, I guess you would have
3-point hero stance.
Yeah, you would need to make a very, very good case about it. Not because, but because it was discussed at some point, and we more or less took a very arbitrary stance at the time. It doesn't mean we won't rediscuss it if it's relevant, but sometimes we have some of those, like, ladders and
ladders. That's a really good example, actually. Ladders. It's like some of it's just like it's just company culture. It's what we.
But it's funny. So there is a little bit of you sometimes you throw an idea like that, that it will be almost heresy, but sometimes it does pick up, and it means that we're ready to move on that role. So it's interesting.
Sure. I mean, well, now would probably be a good moment to kind of talk about those babies and the Dishonored we didn't see, I guess. I mean, what did the first version of that idea look like when you first started working on Dishonored? Was it comparatively similar to the finished game, or was there a time when it was going in a completely different direction?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you're making me try to think back to like 7, 8, 9 years ago now. There's lots of cobwebs in there, man. Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a lot of iteration around the player abilities. Just to give one example, because I mean, lots of things changed, like the fiction, the setting and stuff, of course, went through iterations as well. But you know, I think one of the signature abilities of Dishonored, one of the things that's when you think of Dishonored, you think of the blink ability.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of the backbone of the game experience. It's the power that we give you for free at the beginning of the game, and then everything else after that is up to you. But everyone has blink basically, and so that went through probably like a dozen different incarnations before we landed on the sort of like targeted instant teleport. And even once we knew the kind of a power it was going to be, even just like the amount of work it took into making it reliable and smooth for the player, so that like little tweaky things, like if you targeted the edge of a ledge, that it would auto mantle the player up onto the ledge, you know, like things like that, just to make the experience smooth for the player. But we had early versions where it was like, you know, you target, you know, it was way more constrained. Like you target an AI and it puts you behind him so that it sets you up for a backstab, right? But that didn't pass that filter that I was talking about earlier, because the scope of what you can use that ability for suddenly is way more narrow, right? It's way more like custom and bespoke instead of like open-ended and letting the players like be. It doesn't allow as much expression on the part of the player. To target an AI and put you behind them. I think there was another version that was like, instead of like a teleport through the air, it was like you rush forward, you know, like a lightning bolt really fast, you know, down the street or across the rooftop or whatever. But ultimately, of course, it settled in this like long range, you know, targeted teleport that's way more atomic and lets players be more creative.
Yeah, it's funny when it's funny about Blink. One thing, a small detail, is the fact that that's one of the of the gameplay systems that did that did get care from both studios. You know, it was started in Austin and then it was finalized in Lyon. So you have every love of everyone poured on that one. You could really tell. You know, it's funny. There is a few systems like that have been like moving around owners for various reasons, and you can really tell because they've been, you know, how can I say that? You know, everyone tried to poke holes in them. That's why they are so robust in the end. It's funny, but you know, I think it's about the Dishonored we didn't see. You briefly alluded to that, but I think acknowledging the range of how different the setting could have been is interesting for the record, because it did, you know, it ends up with this, but it was I won't give any specifics, but I think we already said things like at some point it was themed around ninjas. It was themed in the real world. At some point it was in the real world, more or less. It
was like London during the time of the plague or something like that. Like the actual Black Plague.
Wow.
Yeah. So there was like a number of changes, and it's funny because I remember when I joined, which was at the end of the pre-production. So you would imagine a lot of things have been settled already, but actually the role of the outsider was being completely changed.
Oh yeah.
He was originally like more like a Mephisto kind of figure who
like a Faustian bargain kind of thing, like do this wicked thing and I'll give you a power in exchange.
Exactly. So you know, it's and again I think it's a testament to how much the team really strived to make the formula work, etc. That we went through all those things, but at no point did we feel, you know, at no point did it feel you know, like going in every direction. It was always following a thread that made sense and evolved, and sometimes we changed our minds because in French we have a saying that only the fools never change their minds. So at some point we did change our minds along the way, but yeah, it did evolve a lot, and both as an artifact, like the whole thing, when you think about it, and at every level.
Hearing you say that, Dinga, brings to mind how challenging it is to develop a new IP. New IP is like the hardest thing to do in the world, I think.
Yeah, definitely. We are in the middle of, we not that not that we announced ours a while back, but yeah, it's definitely trying because at the same time it's interesting for me because I was Dishonored 2 is the first sequel that Arcane did. As a project, so having consequent in sequence worked on Dishonored, then Dishonored 2, a sequel where again you're going to challenge yourselves, as I mentioned. You're going to revisit a lot of choices, you're going to try to innovate, you're going to do all those things, but at the same time that ecosystem I just mentioned that will be Darwinizing ideas so that the only the ones that are fit for this ecosystem will survive. That ecosystem existed, so you changed it, you moved it somewhere else, but at least it when you're working on something new, wow, like you have to establish that ecosystem and at the same time see if things are fit for it. So
I mean,
exactly.
It's really fascinating though to hear you talk about kind of things like Blink, for example, kind of pinging back and forth between the two teams, and the both of you being able to recognize as people who worked in one office or the other sort of which bits came from which, because I think from a consumer perspective, like you said, a Dishonored screenshot when you see it. I feel like Arcane games, they have a very strong sense of purpose and design. Everything is just so. How, with that in mind, how on earth do you get two studios in different time zones separated by an enormous body of water to go about pulling in the same direction?
Well, it was not easy. I think a number of things help. One is that Raph and Harvey, who were co-creative directors on the project, they traveled a lot. Right, they spent a lot of time on both sides of the ocean. They were situated in Austin, but they went to Lyon quite a bit, and other members of the team did the same thing. They would come, members of the French team would come to Austin and stay with us for weeks at a time. Some of us from the Austin side, we went and stayed in France quite a bit. I went there for like 9 months, and just embedded with the design team there. And of course we had those portals that I talked about open between us constantly. But because of the time separation, it meant that we had a very small window of time where we were overlapping within the same office space, just a handful of hours. And it probably also helped that like the Austin team was smaller. So it wasn't like two separate armies trying to pull in different directions. The bulk of the team was in Lyon. In Austin, we had a handful of programmers, half of the level design team, I think maybe a handful of artists, but like the bulk of the art team, half of the design team, the bulk of the engineering team was in Lyon. So I think that probably helped too. I don't know, what else would you add, Dinga?
Well, I think that we did have some, as you say, I think it's important that we had some things that were where the ownership was shared, where people from both teams were working on the same feature or on the same level. So it made things much easier because again, the goal is common. For instance, we made the scrums over the VidConf, so we had this little meeting every morning where you would have, for instance, the programmers and the designer in Austin, but the animator and the sound designer would be in Lyon, and everyone would update, okay, I did this, I'm doing that, etc., etc. Oh, I think I've seen a bug about this. Oh, yeah, okay, be careful, blah, blah. And then everyone goes back to what they are doing. So actually, in a way, we tried to, I think it's those areas of the game where there was, a common effort from both teams and people from both teams that radiated on the rest, so that everyone felt it's one team. So, of course, every now and then, for instance, it would be easier to solve a problem on one side than the other because the people who who implemented it first, for instance, are there at that time, etc. So there was a number of things, but yeah, I think it's the small things, and then I think you mentioned them, but kudos also to Raf and Harvey for the direction. There was like a strong creative direction and vision for that project. It helps the rest of the team to to go in the same direction.
Yeah, and that's that we're citing all the things that made it work, but that's in spite of the fact that it was difficult. It's not like it was easy to pull that off. It was very challenging, but we were able to do it because of the things that Dinga and I are talking about. One fun bit that I always recall is that it felt a little bit of like the fable of the shoemaker and the elves, where like you would go to sleep, and when you got to work, you would know that like the other side of the team had been working for like 8 hours or so before you got into the office. So it was always cool to come into the office and go, what's new in the engine today, like what got checked in, because people were working while I was sleeping or coming to work or whatever. So it was always fun to discover new stuff. It was kind of a little bit of a magical feeling. I'm not sure if it was the same way on the Leon side, but there was always, because of the offset, like it was almost like somebody was continuously working on the game.
But obviously, even though you're pulling together in terms of your scrums and people working effectively around the clock on the game, just down to the fact that these offices are on different continents, there must have been kind of some different culture there. What were the visits to the other side like for each of you? What struck you most about the other office?
First, I should disclose one thing. I think I'm the person who has one of the people who has been the longest at arcade, but never been to the other side. Yeah, I'm the exception. There was yeah, I know. And each time I say
Can
that,
someone's
like, really?
Wow, that's so weird that you say that, because I think because I always see you during the winter holiday like meetings at Bethesda, I just assumed that you've been to the Austin office. That's so crazy.
That's crazy. Yeah, I know.
That's bullshit. You gotta fix that.
But the funny part about that is that for me, the Austin office is like this weird dream space that exists only in a
box.
And apparently there
my God.
People there working, but no, I mean, but more seriously, I think to me, like, even if I didn't, if I wasn't there physically, I was one of the people who interacted the most with people on the other side of the pond, as I was like, half of the system design team. Seth was in Austin and I was in Lyon. Yeah, there was 2 systems designers on this game. I know it sounds crazy, but
that's mind blowing.
Yeah, I know. But so because of that, I was working with programmers in Austin. The UI for the features that were done in Austin, I was working with the UI artist here. So there was, and of course, Raf and Harvey leading the design team. I had like interactions with them every day. So it's funny. I think you see some of those cultural things, but it's more on the, sometimes on the way we communicate, obviously, the way we approach. But to be fair, I'm not sure it's a Lyon-Austin thing. It's really a cultural thing, because when you see Raf and Harvey, for instance, even if they were both in Austin, you were going to a review with both of them. you would have a completely different way to talk about your feature that is not working, depending on which one would be there. Like the French guy would, of course, be extremely blunt and make a joke about it, whereas the American person would be very polite but very precise in what they want, etc. So, you could see that on those levels of communication, of course. But then there was things like, artistic references or movies that everyone has seen on one side but not the other side. It's like, what? That very niche thing is in the US, that American movie that no one knows in France is like what you watch every Christmas, really. So there was some funny moments like that.
Hey Dinga, in the new office, with the size of the studio over there now, do you guys still do the thing where, like, when you get to work, you shake everybody's hand?
It's not. Well, first of all, COVID-19 happened.
Oh yeah, okay.
So so I think that's the end of it. It
Okay.
will never happen again.
So a little like amusing quirk for me, when I went to live in France, in Lyon, the French studio, they did this thing where, like, whenever you got to work in the morning, you basically would go around and say hello to every other person that was already there. And it was just like a little handshake or whatever, right? And everybody, as far as I know, did this. And so when I first got there, I was like, oh, well, I guess I need to do this too. It was simultaneously, like, very cool. Like, oh, that's a cool way to, like, just kind of team bonding thing or whatever. On the other hand, as an introvert person, I wanted to get to the office as fast as possible so that I could be one of the first people there, so that I had to do that to the least amount of people. Yeah.
Sorry. No, it's funny because just before Arcane, I was in the Netherlands, which is one of those places where you don't shake everyone's hand or kiss everyone. So definitely, actually, coming back to Arcane was I had to adapt to that. Because,
the same way.
I'm in your clan for that, man.
Yeah, I think I would be doing the exact same thing. I'm terrible at greeting people, so I feel you on that one, Ricardo. Now, obviously, talking about immersive sims more broadly, with Dishonored 2 and with Prey, I think certainly with Dishonored 2, it really felt like the world was being opened up, and with levels like the Clockwork Mansion, for example, it became so much more aware of how much there was to explore in the world, but also how much stuff might be hidden. Meaning, of course, there's a lot of content in these games that people just might straight up miss. Does it feel strange to be working on games in the knowledge that in a standard playthrough, a player might miss like whole swathes?
Well, I think I think it depends because I think we approach it with this angle. Isn't it magic when your friend who played the same game tells you about something you had no possible idea that it exists? I think I think the interestingly, even though they are single player games historically, I think there is always this water cooler moment of what you did that is strong, that is part of the experience for us in liking those games when we were younger and when we discovered them. This is the game where you tell your friends about what happens if you combine this with that. Even at the time where, for instance, for me, I was not at all as connected to the internet when I played, there was no internet when I played Underworld, I think. But even when I played, Deus Ex, etc., I was barely reading game facts and things like that. So it was me telling my friends about this crazy game where you can do all those things. There is something a bit magic, a mystique to that, to the fact that you might miss something, but then you might either get told about it by a friend, or you might want to say, I'm going to play again and experience that other side of the world or of the story. So, I think it's not wasted because the simple fact that it exists, that that if you're making a choice, you will deliberately miss something in a sense. It makes that choice more meaningful, and it's I think it's part of the exploration of choice, really. As you said, Ricardo, we give a lot of agency to the players in those games, but if the choices were not meaningful and there was not a payoff to making those choices, it would be just expressive, not there would not be. So I like to think of it as the contrary. It's a generous offer to the people who make the other choice, rather than something I miss if I made this choice. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, you have to know what makes it feel magical is knowing that things could have been otherwise, right? That's what makes the thing that you do meaningful. I will say, all that being said, we still, of course, because we, have to ship a game and we have to make money so that we can keep making more games, we, of course, do consider, how much effort we're putting into all those alternate choices. You know what I mean? If it's like, hey, this many people are going to see the thing that you're doing, but you're spending, this much money, this much time, this much effort to do it. We try to avoid that, of course. We want the, the stuff that we put the most work into that have the most impact. We want to make sure that players at least know about it, right? We
Sure.
want to hide that away. But yeah, you have to feel like I'm in, or at least my favorite kind of game, and what we shoot for with our experiences is even though I know it's not literally true, the game makes me believe that anything is possible.
Right.
Yeah. If you get, I think if you get that illusion as much as possible, we have this motto of saying yes to the player, but the thing is that it's followed with tiny lines that
little asterisk.
little asterisk that says if it's fun, if it doesn't break the game, and if it works within the scope of the game. And the goal.
It doesn't break the budget.
Exactly. and I think the important part with that is that what about when we can't? Well, ideally, the elegant thing is not saying no. The elegant thing is removing this question.
Unasking, yeah, exactly.
Making sure that the player doesn't have this pool to go in to this access if it's not an access. Try to make it that it's less attractive if you cannot just make it available.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. We also try really hard to uninvite, interactions that we can't actually support.
Sure.
We try to make our game not disappoint the player. It seemed like this was possible, but it's not.
Yeah. How was that then? Sort of working on the environments and sort of building Prey from the ground up, because obviously Prey is very different to an entire city. It's a functional facility that has all these mapped out areas, whereas Dunmore you kind of get the sense that it grew up like a European city with bits getting knocked down and rebuilt and all this kind of stuff. Did you have to change your approach in many ways when you started working on Prey?
Not necessarily. Not in terms of our values, our design values, or our principles. Because we Arcane historically had already made a game like that in Arx Fatalis. And in terms of just world building, the same principles that applied to Dishonored applied to Prey. Now mechanically they were a little bit different in the sense that in Dishonored, when you leave a space, you typically leave it for good and you're never going to go back there. Whereas in Prey, the whole game is persistent and you can always go back to any space basically. But other than that, the same care to the history of the place, the same attention to how each space connected to the other one, even thinking through how functionally the spaces contributed to what makes up the space station. All of that is the same approach that we took in Dishonored.
Sure.
If I may, there is an example of the ways. It's funny because when I joined the company, I remember there was one test map. It was just a map that was, I think it was a proposal for changing one of the existing maps. Like it's a far memory, so I don't remember exactly which one, but I remember that meeting because when so there was like a nice drop in the beginning, so there was a little bit of verticality. You could see the area, etc., etc. And then so people were reviewing. I was just here taking notes. I don't remember why exactly, because. And then someone said, "Wait a minute! How do the people who live here go to work then? If you have to drop, it sounds."
They have to do a 20-foot drop.
Exactly. So I loved it because when they said it, I was like, because now I'm starting to think about all these games that in the past or movies or whatever, where you have like a space that it's. When you think about it, if you're an architect, you're probably looking at this like that's a Lego piece, not a. So I think it was very eye-opening for me. So I think when I played it was that times the entire world because there is no space left to the imagination. Maybe that's where they go to work. Like you need to know where they go to have fun, where they go to. Make a jog, etc., etc.
Where do they sleep? Where do they eat? Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it almost feels like in the opening of Prey, which is just a stone cold banger, by the way, when kind of the curtain drops away and you realise, oh, I was in a gimbaled helicopter that was just pretending to fly me across the city. It's kind of, it makes you aware of space, I think, in no pun intended, in a very kind of real way, which I think is really cool. But so obviously, I know that you can't really talk too much about Deathloop, which is why I've kind of saved it for the end. I'm not gonna, we're not gonna, this isn't gonna start being like an intense grilling. But with the caveat that just tell me as much as you're able. In what ways does this feel like an Arcane game to you? Kind of what elements of the game are you most excited for people to see? In reference to kind of the studio's history and the way you do things.
So I think that's interesting. I think one of the specificities of this game is that in its inception, when we started with this idea, it was clearly about an exploration of how much can we twist the formula, how far can we go, how crazy can we go, while keeping it was definitely starting from the premise of how crazy, so we came with a lot of crazy ideas. It was definitely a more we just made a sequel with Dishonored, and then we made a sequel to that sequel with Death of the Outsider, so we wanted to do something that maybe experiment a little bit, challenge ourselves with different things. And very quickly in those discussions and experimentations, well, one of the things that was core is actually not in the game anymore, which is fun. It's fun. It's exactly what I was saying before. Like sometimes one of the foundations of this project is like cast to the bin. Something else just grew to be stronger. So, but anyhow, I think the one thing that glued quickly was the time loop element, as Groundhog Day, explore, a more intimate space, maybe akin to what's in Prey compared to the expensive cities of Dishonored, like center on a cast of character that is a bit reduced, something more intimate, maybe more John Carpenter movies, like it's about this place, those people, this moment in time, not caring about what's happening elsewhere in the world, etc., etc. Very bit more focused. So that was one goal, and then your relationship with space. And we ended up with the time loop as a way to reinforce and entertain an affinity with the space that our players actually get when they replay our games many times. That moment where we know the maps by heart and we are able to do all these crazy combos, like you've seen Stealth Gamer BR's videos. Like he takes 1 month, even more sometimes, to make a video. That's how intricate it is to know the maps by heart to do those combinations. So we were like, okay, what if we find a way to make those space, make the players feel like they are at home in those spaces, not just traversing them like we did in Dishonored. So in the end, we came with this time loop, like one day, one place, one problem, one solution, a lot of different ways to go about how to find the solution to that puzzle. So anyhow, so based on that, I think the two things I'm the most excited about definitely is well, obviously because it's some of the two of the pillars of the game that we talked about. It's the time loop itself and what we are doing with that. I will use a term that Dan Todd, our campaign designer, might resent me for throwing myself, but it's the clockwork campaign. We call the campaign the clockwork campaign. Make your let your imagination wander with that. but so there's that. I think it will be interesting. And the other thing is, of course, the Juliana element, like the other player. I think it's something that is definitely new. It's something that is optional. We say it so, like you can deactivate that if you want. But I really hope people will try it, because it is one way of, when thinking of multiplayer, how can we make something that respects, our fiction, that makes sense in the diegetic sense, so that whatever that player will do in my game can still feel like it's the story of the game. They are not betraying the character and still be allowed to play however they want. Mm-hmm. So I think that was one of the tough nuts to crack about how we ended up with this way of doing multiplayer. And I think I like it because it's intimate, to the point where it's almost disturbing. It's 1 versus 1. It's something like chess, like mm-hmm. Street Fighter. It's not you're not one person in the. It's really kind of an intimate relationship, which is again coherent with what's happening in the fiction and reinforces it. But also, we set up to do this mode where there is it's a bit like Ricardo was saying. There is a bit of yes, of course, both players want to go through the other one. Yes, so there is this element of competition. Yet, actually, as for Juliana, for instance, her play style, there is nothing forcing you to do that. Should you want to just like lurk and follow the players and stalk them and jump scare them every now and then stop until the end of their mission, you can do that. If you want to harass and flee and attack and flee tactic, you can. If you want to just go full confrontation, you can. If you want to lay traps, never be seen, be the mastermind of the NPCs more or less, you can. If you want to help them, that's your choice. I mean, there is nothing in the game preventing you to, So and I think it's interesting because it works with the fiction. The fact that this nemesis is as free and as unpredictable is something that is coherent. So yeah, I'm definitely excited. It's to the point where we are now, we are now finishing the game, etc. And now what we really want is seeing what players will do with it. Like how it's fun because we will not only be seeing videos of people playing the game, which is a high note of the streaming age, I have to say, that when we release a game, we can see people finishing it the same day. But we will also be seeing those interactions, those stories being created. Hey, I'm like, for instance, if you take something like Bloodborne, I actually had a nice, actually even worse, Absolver. In Absolver, so I don't know if you know that game. It's this multiplayer brawler when you can meet with random people and you can like, team with them, or you can challenge them, etc. So I was playing Absolver, and I grouped with someone who helped me, and we were like going through the mission together. And at some point, for almost no reason, they started betraying me, which was nice because my girlfriend at the time was next to me, and she saw the whole thing, and it was like a TV show for her. What did you do? Really? Like, and she's not even caring about the game, but because I'm starting to react to the emergent betrayal, she's like, what? But look at him, he's taunting you. Like, come on, do something. It was really, really fun. So, and that story will last, longer than the game, and will be treasured because it's my story, but it's the intersection of the game and someone else. And I think it's that we are trying to foster with this, Colt and Juliana multiplayer.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, I think that's all we have time for, but I want to thank you both so much. This has been really fascinating and really illuminating. So yeah, thank you again for taking the time out.
Yeah, this was a great talk. Thanks for hosting this and giving me a chance to hang out with Dinga for a little while.
Exactly, it's nice.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the permanent portal on a trolley isn't really feasible in your own homes, so there it is. But yeah,
all right, guys.
Yeah, thanks again so much, and thanks to everyone watching at home. Yeah, that'll about do it, I think. See ya.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Game begin.
What on earth is a global digital event, I hear you ask? Well, allow me to enlighten you. This event is a gathering of hot gaming content that you would have been able to see at PAX West in Seattle, PAX Australia in Melbourne, or EGX in London in September, before COVID changed the world in what, let's be honest, is a storyline from a video game. In fact, it's bound to spawn many post-viral games in the near future. We'll be hunting through the city streets, crafting masks from animal hides, and all while still on furlough. Instead, you can sit at home and take in all the delights of a truly global event, enjoying the food from your kitchen at a reasonable price, and have a seat guaranteed, all day. Amazing! At this event, you'll be able to poke around over 200 booths on the show floor, and have a deep dive into some great curated content you might not have seen before. And it's all in one place, like a show. Just have a click around and discover stuff, then click further and discover more stuff. The show floor, or Expo Hall if you're speaking American, is just part of the event we're presenting. On top of the Expo Hall, we also offer you some of the highlights of any PAX or EGX show. Tons of brilliant panels. You'll be able to visit the site, paxegx.com, and navigate your way via the show floor to the massive schedule. It's like a Glastonbury festival of gaming, with massive headline acts and loads of interesting things to watch in the meantime. There will always be something great in there just for you. The Daily Wrap from Virgin Media, presented at 5:30 UK time each day. This will be brought to you by a mix of the brilliant teams at Outside Xbox and Outside Extra, Eurogamer, and Rock Paper Shotgun. They'll highlight the hotspots from the show day that's just happened and look forward to what's coming up next, all using boss-level broadband for gamers. Meet up on Discord. We all know that hanging out with your friends is a really important part of going to an event. Meeting people you already know, making new friends, and hanging out. The Left Field Collection is a must-see for attendees looking for the new, unique, and challenging works going on in games. This is a platform for titles and projects that like to do things a little differently, and promises to always have something interesting to check out. With over 100 indie titles at this year's show, there's going to be tons to discover. There are loads of other features, including speedrunning, cosplay, some interesting limited edition retail opportunities, and board games, with loads of videos from our partners at Dicebreaker. Exclusive event merch! What with this being the first time we've done a standalone digital event, this merch will be very limited edition. Show off to your friends with a fetching new hat at a distance of 2 meters or greater, or grab something special for a loved one or hated enemy. The shop's live now, and you can find it on this site or by searching for the EGX store. And if it's PAX merch you're after, you can search for that too. That's a taste of what to look out for while you're strolling around the digital show floor. There's loads of hot gaming content to come over the next few days. Some of it's live now, and some will be going live later, so be sure to check out all the booths to find out more. Oh, and don't worry if you miss a panel. Everything is going to be uploaded soon after to the EGX YouTube channel. but always better to see it first, right? In the meantime, here are some of the things to keep an eye on.
Hi everyone, welcome to this panel on unionizing the games and tech industries. Thanks to PAX Online and to EGX Digital for hosting us. It's kind of a shame that these events can't take place in the real world, but I think it's fair to say that unless these events were digital, we wouldn't have been able to get this panel together, because we've got representatives from all over the world. So my name is Mike Saunders. I work for a trade union in Scotland called Prospect, and with me today we've got Amy Moran from FSU in Ireland, Emma Kinnemer and Wes McKenney from Code CWA, which is a part of the Communications Workers of America, and Carrie Lubeck from Uni Global in Switzerland, and Magnus Gerentz from Unionen in Sweden. So to give a little bit of context about this panel, the point is to talk about trade unions in the context of game studios and tech companies, to talk about what's going on so far, and to talk about why we're talking about unionization right now and organizing, and what's happening and why you should get involved and how to get involved wherever you are. So just to begin, what is happening in the games industry and why are we organizing now? I don't know if Carrie, if you want to start with that question.
Yeah, you can go first. So yeah, thanks, Mike. So first of all, gaming sector, it's huge and it's growing. So as we know, it's already bigger than movies and music combined. So of course, for us and for the workers, it's important that the workers get their share of the huge and growing profits, of course. As it's growing, there's also huge potential. And it's young, so the workers in games, it can be said that they're actually the future workforce, or already they are the workforce, but they are growing, and it's going to be important for the unions to have these new workers, and especially like young people, immigrants, sexual minorities. Unions must have a democratic voice. And if unions want to be representative, they also have to include games employees. And of course, for games employees, it's also important for them to be in the union so that they can be represented. But most of all, basically, in the gaming sector, there are huge issues, and I'm sure the other participants can go much more into detail with those. But there's the unpaid overtime, there's the sexual harassment, this bro-centric toxic work environment in many big companies, discrimination going on. So there are issues that need solving, and it's in some cases it's similar to IT and tech companies, but of course there are huge variety of different jobs and different issues. So for us in the global union, it's important to create alliances between workers in different companies. And for example, when we start campaigning, it's essential that the game workers get their voices heard also, and their needs and aspirations. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, we've the reason we kind of started in Scotland was because there was this huge influx of money from the Scottish government for tech industries and games industries, and Edinburgh's become this kind of hub for tech and games in Europe. And we just noticed that although there's a huge amount of money and there's a huge amount of economic importance attributed to these companies, there was very little unionization throughout the sector. And there's in terms of economically, the tech and games industry is huge, but in terms of unionization, it's in the UK, it's second only to the hospitality industry in terms of how sparse the unionization is. And we just thought that was a really strange paradox, really, that the amount of money and the amount of people in this growing industry were just not being represented at all. And exactly as you say, Carrie, there's so many emerging issues that are only going to get bigger as the sector gets larger and larger. One of the ones that we've really been campaigning on is pay inequality and pay transparency. Just people are paid completely different rates. None of it is out in the open, and we can't really even begin to talk about that pay inequality until everyone knows what they're being paid. So it's a really big it's a small campaign in a way, and it's a small question to ask, but it has potentially like huge ramifications. So it seems like a good place to start for us. I don't know if Amy, you had, if you were going to come in on something.
Yeah, I think that I suppose like I've been working with game workers now for about a year. So I suppose like from our perspective and how we kind of see it is that like with the decline of worker power over the past however many decades that it's been going on, unfortunately they've been successive. That's what has kind of happened is that there has been a kind of shift and in terms of like contradiction. So I think there's a certain level of expectation now that people have when they go into workplaces that maybe aren't being met. So, you know, like you have a case where people are graduating or maybe they're not, but people are going into the games industry and they're kind of thinking, oh, well, I thought this was a good job. But then they get there and they're like, oh, wait, hang on a minute. The bosses have unilateral control of this workplace. There's no workplace democracy. There's no transparency. There's like a culture of, you know, individualization and blame. And like, it's just a really like, I think it's gotten to the stage, and certainly in Ireland, at least, like where people are kind of starting to say across all aspects of their lives, but certainly in the workplace, that they're kind of starting to say, well, no, like this has gone a little bit too far now. And I think individually, each person that I've spoken to and who I've worked with, they all have their own individual motivations and their own individual stories that have motivated them to decide that they want to build a union and take that risk. But ultimately, there's a realization that to achieve things and to you know, make the lives of working people and their communities better, that we need to start working collectively rather than individually. So it's the difference between, you know, reading one of these magazine articles about how can I go in and negotiate a pay increase for myself. It's like, no, hang on, how are we going to all go in and negotiate a pay increase together for all of us? And I think there's just been a kind of like attitude shift towards that. You know, it's like, why is there no democracy in workplaces? And I think in games, that's really evident. That attitude is like really, really prevalent.
Yeah, Emma, you had your hand up to say something.
Yeah, and sorry, I'm a little sick, so my voice is a little rough. But yeah, I mean, as a former game worker myself, you know, I've gone through the exact process Amy's mentioned, where you know, working games was a dream job, and to get into it, you know, I was happy to take whatever the job was, whatever the hours were, whatever the pay was, just to get my foot in the door, right? But at some point, you know, that kind of shiny appeal of the industry starts to kind of fade away over time as you realize that there's huge amounts of people who are dropping out of the industry from just sheer burnout, the fact that you can't have oftentimes a long-term stable professional career where you can actually have a family and plan for retirement and have a stable employment situation, right? And I think, you know, there's definitely these bread and butter kind of day-to-day improvements we'd like to see, I think, as game workers, but it's also just about respect and having professionalization and dignity on the job, I think. And sometimes that gets missed in conversations. And I like what Amy was saying about, you know, having democracy at the workplace. You know, I think in general, the game industry can be really individualizing and kind of pit people against each other and feel like you have to kind of scrape your way to the top, I guess, to make it through. And I think a much better way would be to be supportive and collaborative with one another to raise everyone's conditions up, right? That helps everybody. And I also think it kind of doesn't have to be a foreign concept, because in the industry, we have just a huge variety of different disciplines that work together, whether it's like art or writing or design, programming, audio, QA testing, community management. I mean, you name it. We have a huge number of different types of people with all kinds of skill sets in this industry. We know how to collaborate. We make billion-dollar games that have just huge teams of people across not just countries, but you know, across whole continents working on them. And you would think we'd be able to get together and improve our workplace and improve our say in how our games are made too. So I think it's a really natural next step in the kind of development of our medium, frankly.
Yeah, as you say, there's such a broad range of people there, and like a broad range of what we might traditionally describe as different classes across the industry as well. And although some of them are quite well compensated financially, others are absolutely not, and the conditions are terrible. And there's like an opportunity there to bring so many different people together, and some have power and some don't, and that some of the actions of the powerless are gonna compel those who have more influence or more power or more privilege in their companies to rise that tide, to raise all boats. Magnus, you had your pen in the air. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I agree really with what you are saying, but I think the games industry really, in a lot of ways, an amazing industry. It's fast growing. It's I mean, a lot of people are still loving the way they are able to express their creativity, but still the industry, I would say, suffers from a lot of like childhood diseases, since it's very fast growing. And that includes like many core union issues, such as excessive overtime, lack of influence and transparency, poor plans for parental leave, lack of diversity, and so forth. And I think a unionized sector is a great way to help like shed light and rectify some of those problems, especially through like collective bargaining agreements and through influence in decision making.
Yeah. Agreed. Wes, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, no, this has all been really great. I think, maybe from just a sort of a more macro perspective, right? And Carrie touched on this a little bit. I mean, in terms of the entertainment sector, this is the fastest growing space, right? This is sort of the future. And to Emma's point, there's such a vertical in the game sector where you have such a wide variety of job titles that are represented, and it is sort of, a last bastion of, creative work that you can get paid for. And so I say all that to say that if this sector isn't organized, if there isn't workplace democracy, if these workers that trend younger aren't able to have power in the coming generation, it's just going to mean, a total erosion of material gains of workers abroad, right? As this industry continues to sort of grow exponentially.
Well, to move on from that briefly, I think we all are clear on why there needs to be further unionization and organizing. I just wanted to ask everyone what they have done so far. So I know there's going to be different stories from all the different countries here, partially because of different labor laws, partially because of the size of the industry, partially just because of different kind of cultural things about trade unionism. It would be really interesting to hear, what's happened so far. Can I come to you, Amy, first? Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. So, an initial kind of like, for me, I suppose like it's been a baptism of fire working with game workers in a very positive way. I shouldn't say fire, I should say something else. Very, very powerful experience. So what I've been doing with workers so far, what workers have been doing, what I've been supporting them to do has been to really just to start to systemically look at their workplace structures, okay? So like over the past 10 months, they've really honed in on workplace organizing and how they're going to do that. So really developing strategy, developing plans, how to win. And essentially the strategy, like for us so far, has been to just build density, because for anybody that wants to win a union, because that's what you're doing in an ununionized sector, for anybody who wants to win, who wants their demands to be heard, density is the only resource that you have and that you can rely on. That's the only weapon that working class people have is their numbers. So really the focus has been so far to build in a number of workplaces. And I think it's really interesting what Emma said, which is that, there's kind of a predisposition almost for collaborative working within the industry, because when I'm working with game workers, they just get it. You know, they're just like, oh yeah, no, I know I have to talk to every single one of my coworkers. I know I have to do that, and I know that if we want to win, we have to convince them all. So like, it's actually been like a very, very positive experience so far. And yeah, the strategy is just to build density, so you know that they can start making some serious demands. In terms of the law in Ireland, I can speak briefly to that just here, just because I know there's different contexts. So we're quite unlucky in that our industrial relations legislation is, in my opinion at least, very, very bad. We have a voluntarist model, which means that the employer can opt in or out of trade union recognition. There's no clear path for workers to win, because essentially, you know, you can say, well, I want my union recognised, and the employer just doesn't have to show up. So if you look at the Irish context, there have been workers in places like Lloyd's Pharmacy. That was a huge dispute that happened a few years ago, where essentially the employer just basically just doesn't show up. So I think that now, really what like the Irish trade union movement and what game workers as a result have learned from that experience is that to win, they're gonna have to build super majorities. So that's essentially what's been going on over here at least. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar here. The fact that it's completely voluntary recognition, that sucks. That sucks
Yes.
for you. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's great if there is. We have it slightly different, where there is. It's better for relations if a company decides to recognise voluntary, but if not, there is a legal route that we can go down, but you need to get well, it's slightly complicated depending on the size of your company, but yeah, we have another recourse to that. But our strategies have been the same. I think it's just, yeah, like you say, build up that density, and it's really, it's an interesting problem in a way, because there's almost two cultures that are competing. With one, in the UK, you've got a kind of strong tradition of trade unionism up until the 70s or so, and as you say, it's been beaten down ever since, but is definitely growing back at the moment. So we've got that like strong history of it there, but then in the games and tech industry, there, because of the complete lack of it, there's almost a it's just a lack of consciousness about the movement, really. And when I've gone into workplaces, I've expected to be met with I suppose suspicion from management or even from workers, and there hasn't been any of that really, but there has been much more very kind of basic education about what a union does and why it's needed in the industry, and I'm absolutely happy to provide that, but it was just surprising. So like you say, the density is the most important thing in a way, because we just need to increase that the normalization of unions in the industry, and then, you know, as you get more young people coming into the industry and going to places like Code Clan, we've got here, it's like a coding school. If you can talk about unions in those coding schools as just a regular part of the industry in the same way that they are with more established industries, then it's just going to be, you know, it's going to be such a win for everyone in the industry already, and everyone kind of coming up through it. I don't know, does anyone else want to come in on what did Magnus? Yeah, did you want to say something about what your?
Yeah. So I don't know if you know, but Sweden has a really strong tradition of labor unions.
Yeah.
We have like 70% are members of a union in the workforce, and 90% are covered by a collective bargaining agreement. But in the games industry, that is not the case. We have 30% that are members of a union. That's still high in an international comparison, obviously, but for us, it's really low, and that's a big problem. Now, on the organizing part, we have been focusing on recruiting members, recruiting local union reps, with the main goal of signing a collective bargaining agreement. So to some extent that has been successful. It's still a problem that so few companies have a collective bargaining agreement. It's only a handful in Sweden. But more are getting on board, but it's a slow process. We've also started doing more lobbying and PR on a more industry-wide level, writing op-eds in industry media, writing a report on the challenges in the industry and how we should approach it. And this to some extent in order to get the employees in the industry to understand that we know the challenges they are facing, but also to let the employers know that we are not, turning a blind eye to any problems that they are causing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. We've been, in terms of the tech industry, we've been doing a similar thing. We're talking about AI and surveillance in every company at the moment, I suppose. So it's interesting how issues that begin in games and especially in tech then lead out into every other part of the industry. It was one of our kind of key organizing goals, I suppose, at the beginning, is to probably quite a utopian idea in a way, is that if we can organize developers, then they have such a strong influence on the future of work for people in every other industry. So it can be something that can nearly said trickle down there, but we're not gonna trickle down economics is obviously not something that we're a big fan of. But yeah, there's a way that people in positions of power and positions of influence, and developers are in such a unique position in that way, can affect the working lives of so many people. I don't know if Wes or Emma, you wanted to talk about any of the experiences you've had so far.
Sure, and honestly, I think it's dangerous to talk about macroeconomics because that's typically where Wes and I go during our weekly and daily sync-ups. I think it's a big part of this, actually. So I do think it is something people should understand, that overall the workforce generally in post-industrial societies is moving towards service, intellectual work, and tech-based work, right? And as that becomes more and more, dominant practice, we need to be organizing in tech in this way. So I do think it is important really to note that. But, in terms of, things that are going on, we are not at a 30% unionization rate like our friends in Sweden are, unfortunately, but, we're going to get there one day. I think it's important to think of the US industry as being very early on, really trying to build that first foundation of just getting folks to understand the concept of organizing, why it's important, and it really even just how to go about it and how frankly normal and human of a process it can be. I find, especially here in the US, where so much of our media and culture and politics has just a completely vehemently anti-union mythology and discourse and culture, there's a lot of myths to unpack for people, and people tend to have this really big, scary concept of what organizing and being in a union means for them. When really, at the end of the day, it's just talking to your coworkers and friends and asking about what issues they care about, what do they struggle with, day to day, and also what do they like about the company, what do they like about their jobs and want to protect from future encroaching, slipping conditions and corporatization and things, right? So it's a much more human and personal and emotional process than I think people realize. It's not just waving a flag and storming the barricades, right? So I think that's a lot of the work that we've been up to lately. Of course, in terms of public notable things, obviously, some time ago, the riot workers fought back against forced arbitration, which was this big practice of essentially silencing folks who wanted to take the company to court over things like abuse or discrimination or harassment, typically affecting marginalized people most directly. And that was a huge effort and a huge win, and I know they continue to organize. I think we continue to see things where either big kind of harassment or toxic workplace culture things come out into the press or get leaked out online, and people are having more and more robust conversations about what it means to be a worker in the industry, and that people really shouldn't have to put up with shit anymore. And I think that's a qualitative cultural shift that we're seeing that will enable a whole lot of really good organizing in the future as people have higher expectations, more professional expectations of working in this industry. And I think, the last thing I would mention, and Wes can talk more about this, is, we just had our 3-week-long strike by some game writers for a company called Voltage. In fact, actually, one of them is based in Ireland and is a member of FSU, which we think is just wonderful. There are these wonderful women and non-binary LGBTQ folks of color who write for this romance mobile game, and they went on a 3-week-long strike. 21 out of 20 of one of the writers got together, and they were super unified, super compassionate towards each other, and they were able to win an average of 78% pay increase, which is huge. And I think it also, in my opinion, almost kind of more importantly, they had a huge qualitative shift in how they felt about their work, because where they were kind of previously these kind of siloed off independent contractors, now they all know each other. They're not like mysterious usernames on a company chat, service, right? They're like people who they know and they can talk to. And that changes how you feel about your workplace when you have such an intimate connection and you've been through something so difficult and trying as a 3-week-long strike. And so, yeah, I think that's just a wonderful, huge step. And I would say it's the first public union in the US and Canadian games industry to actually have like a workplace shop. They're not recognized. They didn't go through the kind of United States' typical legal recognition process, but they are a union. They really are. Because, at the end of the day, any group of workers coming together to improve the workplace and stand up for each other and actually succeeding in that, that's a union. I don't care if you're legally recognized or not, that is the case. And so I think that's a huge thing worth noting. And I think also it's worth noting, like, there's been a huge amount of organizing in this industry that doesn't get seen actually here in the US. Countless examples of departments or teams or studios taking collective action on issues and winning on issues, on a piece-by-piece rate. Maybe they haven't organized a full-on union and maybe they're not public about those successes, but there's tons of stories like that, both from like studios I've personally worked at in the past and, many that I have friends and peers who work at different studios where that's happened. So I think it's also important to note that if folks aren't seeing like super public, like, press releases or social media like announcements of big wins, there's also always every day stuff like that happening on the shop floor, on the day-to-day, because anywhere where people face some level of exploitation or oppression, there's always people fighting back against that, even if it's not in as unified and powerful a way as it could be.
Yeah, no, I agree completely, and it's really important to highlight both of those things. That it's such union, like organizing, is such a human act, and I've learned in my other life as a trade union convener, just in the workplace. I did know a handful of people there, and then over the course of a few years, being more involved with the trade union there, I know close to all of the people who work in the company, like 300 people, and you learn all about their lives, you learn about their stories, and you do just you ask people questions that you would think otherwise would be none of your business, or that people would be private about, but people want to talk to you, and it's such a wonderful way to interact with each other. And yeah, to your other point, so much of unionization and organizing happens in the workplace and is small and is kind of slow work, but really like endlessly important, and not everything can be a massive story, and not everything has to be a massive story, and it would be kind of weird if it was, because not everything is for the newspapers, I suppose. But but in another way, it's like following the recent success that was that you guys had. It was amazing just to watch it on Twitter and see how organized they were, and yeah, like you say, how they all came together and it was a huge success. 78% on it. That's It's a big win. It's a big win. Carrie, you had your hand up a little while ago. I don't know if you had something to say.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to relate to what Emma was saying about, you know, the growing mentality and basically I want to say consciousness, not just like a group consciousness, but the personal consciousness that games employees are workers also, and the realization has come there. They're not entrepreneurs or freelancers or whatever. I remember I'm coming originally from Finland, so we have a similar system like Magnus in Sweden, and but games workers haven't been organized in a long time. And I remember in Rovio when they had a huge layoffs. I think that was in 2016. There was a big realization amongst that group that actually we're workers and we have similar problems, and we need the union also to help us in these problems. But you know, it's been a long road, and looking at the road, it, of course, depends on how far you want to go. If you can go all the way back to like 1979, when IBMers started protesting against the apartheid system in South Africa, when IBM computers were used in South Africa for their passbook system of identification and control, and all the way from there, there's been like a lot of things happening. If you look at, of course, the big boom of tech organizing, I guess that started, you have to say, in USA with the election of the current president, who invited the tech CEOs into his tower for the so-called tech summit, which was, I guess, a breaking point for many people, and left a lot of people disillusioned seeing their CEOs shaking hands and being in a photo shoot with this president. Although for minorities, for example, I guess the dark side of these companies had been quite visible for a long time already. But I guess it has become now more systematic, and the organizing has become more in-depth and more effective, and that's why we're seeing so much in media also what's happening, and of course media has also taken a lot of interest, so it's become more visible, and that means that there is like this movement growing. The employees are themselves seeing that, okay, other people are having similar problems, maybe we need to start doing something about it. Sorry about the lighting. I'm gonna close the drapes.
Oh, beautiful day over there. Yeah, I mean, it's well, I was going to kind of use that to jump onto the next point we were going to talk about, was like how, in the same way that you mentioned that you know, it was a kind of wake-up call for some people in America, but not so much for certain minorities in America and for people who had been discriminated against before. I think that's something that's been common amongst all of us doing organizing work across the games industry, is that the workers in workplaces who are kind of leading that charge are people of color, are people from the LGBTQ community, are people who have been otherwise disenfranchised and know what that work is from a life of experience of it. So I guess I want to ask everyone what their well, both as organizers, like who you have had success speaking to, and then if people are in their workplaces in the games industry looking to start to organize their games industry, or the industry as a whole, but also just their workplace, who should they talk to? How should they start? What should they do? Where can they go? You can pick any or all of these questions. Does anyone want to jump in? Yeah, Wes, go ahead.
Yeah, Emma talked about the voltage writers, but you know, I've been organizing unions for almost a decade and a half, and they taught me a lot, right? From the moment when I met the first worker and we hopped on Zoom, you know, she didn't know anybody else at the workplace at that point. She just communicated with a couple over Discord. And then, you know, systematically, we talked about, all right, well, how do we reach out to a couple of them on Discord? And then a following week, you know, there were 5 workers on the Zoom call. And then we talked more about reaching out. And before you know it, you know, they had all 21 on board and ready to take aggressive action. And what I would say, and anyone can do that, right? Anybody if they're motivated and you really want to make change in your workplace, you can do that. And the second thing that I would say that I learned a lot about this is Emma said, you know, they were all women or non-binary. Most of them were queer. They were, you know, marginalized already. And I think because of that, when they went on strike and the strike got really hard, and there's this moment, you know, especially in America, to get individualistic and have your fear and anxieties, you know, present that way, they actually turned inward and, you know, really got through their strike at the dullest times and toughest times because they were there for each other, right? It really became more about like the person, you know, virtually next to you than it did about them individually. And that's what they were saying to us, not, you know, that's not like an observation. That was coming straight from them. So I think that part is key. And, you know, in terms of what the next steps are, you know, with Code in the US, Code CWA, we have weekly trainings that we do on the weekends that anyone can register for that's interested in organizing and can meet other workers that have been organizing. And we've been doing those for almost 6 months at this point, you know, every other weekend. And so, you know, that's what I would say. I'd say reach out, start talking to like, you know, someone that you know at work or someone that on your team and get it going.
Hey, great. Anyone else want to come in on experiences organizing so far, or who they should contact, or what like should be the first steps? I guess I agree with Wes that, yeah, that's we're holding some just organizing trainings just for like the basics for anyone who wants to jump in. But there is yeah, I mean, we'll come on to this a bit later, but I suppose the process of organizing has been turned on its head a little bit during lockdown, and it's yeah, the importance of that physical interaction with people when you are organizing has had to be completely reconfigured. But it's kind of amazing that Voltage managed to do that so quickly and to really turn that to their advantage. Amy, did you have your hand up? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, like, if there's anybody that will be watching that is working in the games industry, I think the first thing that anybody can do as any worker in any industry is reach out to a trade union organizer. I don't say that because I think that, you know, I don't think that trade union organizers are I mean, I'm biased, but I don't think they know everything. But,
yeah, we do. We're the best. We've got it all.
But no. But what I would say is reach out because the support is there. Don't be scared. Have an open mind, and just reach out to your union organizer, and then just see what happens. Like, I mean, like, to be honest, I think that, like, from my own experience, I've met workers last year, okay, who were so scared, who were like, oh my God, will this ever work? None of my coworkers are going to get on board. And like, now they're committed activists and they're like on committees and they're like driving, organizing. And like Emma said something earlier about like organizing being an emotional process. Something that we don't talk a lot about in unions, but I mean, it really, really is, because it's it's feeling the fear and then just taking the leap and just doing it and seeing what happens. Like, that's like it essentially. So like, for anybody that is interested in getting involved and building a union in their workplace, reach out to your union organizer, don't be scared, and just see what happens. That's what I would say.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, we're not scary. Yeah, we literally want to talk to you. And yeah, I mean, that's the basis of all of it. You don't have to, as soon as you start, one of us are not going to, you know, put a little Marxist hat on you and send you to the front lines. It's all, you know, well, Amy is. But yeah, it all starts somewhere, and it's infectious. You know, I think we've probably have all come up through that initial conversation or an initial thought of, you know, something here isn't fair, something here isn't right, and then it's become such a huge part of our lives, not because it, you know, needed to be, but because, and well, it did need to be, but that, you know, that it becomes infectious, and that drive, yeah, becomes, you know, a kind of defining and important part of why you live your life, and it can be, you know, incredibly enriching as much as it can get you down because of the nature capitalism. You've got an incredibly strong network, a global network that we've got here of people who can support you and who you can talk to. And it's incredibly strong and it's incredibly uplifting. And when you do, you know, it is an emotional process, but you come out of it with, you know, friends who you'll always like share something with. Emma, did you have something you wanted to come in on?
Yeah, you know, listening to you and Amy kind of sparked something. You know, I think multiple of us have said throughout this panel that literally anyone can organize and everyone should be involved with it. I want to really underline that, actually, like literally anyone. I don't care who you are. I don't care what job you have. I don't care what your form of employment are. You can organize, like really. If you work for someone, if you have a boss, if you have a company that you're beholden to, you can organize and you can make connections with folks. Whether you feel like you don't know anyone in your company or you're the social butterfly on your team, you know, I think whether you're a AAA worker, mobile games, VR, indie, a freelancer, it does not matter. Permatemp, you know, it doesn't matter. People should reach out and get involved. You know, I've seen, you know, I think a trend of, you know, I think marginalized folks and sensitive kind of actually introvert folks being kind of really amazing organizers because I think that emotional quality is there. But I've seen literally all kinds of people be amazing. Even, you know, like conservative folks who most people would say, oh, well, they wouldn't want a union. But, you know, I've seen amazing people, you know, regardless of political stances or, you know, experience with unions or anything like that, just be wonderful organizers. Because at the end of the day, do you want better conditions? Do you want to protect the things you like about your job? Do you like your coworkers? Or maybe even if you don't like your coworkers, do you feel like they should have a better workplace, right? If you care about those things and about career and about your professionalism in the industry, you can organize. And I just cannot say that enough. And yeah, when it comes to, you know, Canada and the United States, people can reach out to Wes and I, and we have a whole team of organizers who can help out. You know, code-cwa.org is where people can find us.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, completely. Like there's, I think there is from outside the movement a perception that we want to destroy everything, but it's really like people get involved in unions because a lot of the time it's because they love the place that they work and they want to make everything about it better, and they want to be you know, amplify the things that make them proud about it, and to you know, be able to say that to other people, like, you know, it's an amazing place to work, we've got this and this, we've got fair work, we've got equality across the board, everyone is paid fairly, you know, we get great holidays, there's yeah, I mean, it's just you want to unite that kind of part of your life that is spent working with the part of your life that believes things should be, you know, ethical and just, and that everyone should be treated fairly. So I might just, we've still got a little bit of time left. I just wanted to maybe wrap up by asking everyone about lockdown and their kind of digital experiences of organizing. I suppose for us, I mean, to be completely honest, a lot of our organizing was, when we started organizing with games and tech workers, I imagined a lot of it would be online. But when we actually began to do it properly, the initial conversations were online, but there was a real like thirst to meet in groups in physical locations in person, which was in some ways very comforting for me, because that's how we kind of came up as organizers, you know, meeting people in physical spaces. And it's still that incredibly important moment of when someone comes to meet you, or you kind of meet them for a coffee, or you meet them in the workplace, and just by meeting them you kind of cross that threshold into saying, okay, yeah, I'm ready to do something, or I'm interested in enough to come and have that conversation. So when lockdown happened, some of our digital, we converted all the meetups to digital, and they were not as we didn't get as many people coming to them as we did otherwise. But I mean, everyone had so many pressures on them, and with everything happening online and everything on Zoom and Meet and all of the other platforms that are available, I think some of that got lost in the white noise. But the advantages of that is that we were also invited to speak at other meetups. So we got a chance to speak to communities that we hadn't managed to talk to before, because their same meetups were kind of going, didn't have the numbers either. So everyone was trying to inject some kind of interest that they didn't have otherwise. So it's been a real advantage for us in that way to be able to travel, wherever in Scotland or in the UK or in terms of this across the world, to speak to communities that we otherwise wouldn't have access to. And we also, so the Scottish government is very open to unions, and we have something called the Fair Work Framework, which is all about kind of putting unions and normalizing unionization in a lot of industries. So we worked with them on the guidance for safe return to the workplace. And when we were doing that, we had a kind of open forum with tech workers where we said, look, we've got this straight path to power. We can, what do you want us to talk about? What do you want to have in your workplace to feel safe? And what other issues can we piggyback on the back of this meeting with ministers in order to get into the conversation there? So it's, in some ways it's made us unable to have contact with people, but in other ways it's really reduced distance and distance, geographically, but also that distance to power has kind of, you can, everyone's in their house, everyone's got a couch behind them and a cat that jumps up on their screen. Everyone is leveled, and it's really, really useful to have those conversations when you can really see the humanity behind someone. Yeah, so that's been our experience. I don't know if anyone else has had any good things or bad things about having to organize digitally that they want to talk about. If someone puts their hand up, I'm gonna pick up someone. Okay, Emma put her hand up.
Yeah, I think the transition to work from home was a bit rocky. I think at first, in particular, like you'd think you would weather it a little bit better because, game workers and tech workers, we tend to be very, already connected online and kind of outside of meet space, I guess. But it definitely did present an obstacle, and I think not all of our organizing committees at the time made it through that transition. Some really just couldn't make that jump. They lost steam, not being able to meet in person and talk to people on the shop floor and stuff like that. That being said, I think the ones who did make it through were really strengthened by that experience. And I think kind of like what you're getting to, Mike, I think COVID has provided just definitely plenty of obstacles to organizing, between, having just burdens on people's time and people having to deal with family issues and all kinds of things. But it's also presented a lot of opportunities, at least for us. I mean, one is, like we've said, earlier, the basis of organizing is really just reaching out and communicating to your coworkers and caring about them and learning about them. And there's pretty much no better premise than an international pandemic where you haven't seen your coworkers in months and months, to just be able to message someone and be like, hey man, I haven't seen you in like 3 months. We should have a catch-up call sometime. I would love to check in with you and see how you're doing, right? And then you can have, it's a perfect introduction to having those kind of conversations that we're talking about. And I also think, a lot of companies that I've seen, during this transition to working from home have completely failed to kind of keep up the kind of, I don't know, like the kind of social bonding, the social glue of the workplace. Like there's less of those kind of in-person activities and things that keep people socially together. And I think that can be an opportunity actually, because if you're organizing committee, and when I say that, I mean the workers who are active in building a union in their workplace, if they can step up and fill that kind of vacuum and be a social connective kind of group, and a group that brings people together and keeps people in touch and checks in on each other and has like social events, even if it's online, together, that can be a wonderful boost to your organizing, because, you know, like we've been saying, it's human, it's social, it's connective, it's you know, communicative. So it definitely, it's, you know, a double-edged sword to be sure, but you know, I think that there's definitely opportunities to be had with this tricky new era of online organizing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree completely. Like the unions have really carried that weight of I don't know, you know, emotional labor, just asking people how they are. I mean, that's something that the companies have really dropped the ball with in general, is keeping up with people's mental health and how, you know, how they're faring. And it's something that, yeah, a lot of the workers I've been working with, you know, they're the first to ask that. And we've people in different organizing committees, they're just building in, as well as talking about all of the health and safety things that are going on. They've been building in time to just, you know, catch up with each other, make sure everyone's doing okay. And it's just something that would otherwise be missing from that corporate space. And it's incredibly important. And it's something that, you know, organizing and talking to your fellow workers and colleagues, you can provide that, and yeah, and it can be the beginning of a organizing conversation, or it can be just, you know, something else. It can be, but you know, it's a really important part of the process. I don't know if anyone else had any. Wes, wants to jump in? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much more to add from what Emma said, but just that the one thing we've seen, I think, is that a lot more workers initially are more comfortable, I think, doing one-on-ones than traditionally, because there isn't the risk at the workplace of like ever running into a manager, right? Like no one's going to get in the Zoom call. So in the double-edged sword, I would say that I think on, you know, some of the committees, especially the ones that we've started up since COVID, people are like more ready to do one-on-ones, and I think there's like this leveling of anxiety that's stripped away. You know, being remotely, which obviously, you know, is a huge benefit. If you can, you know, have more conversations early on in your campaign, you know, you can jumpstart it a lot faster.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Okay, well, we're coming up to the end of our time, so I might wrap it up there. Oh, Magnus, you want to jump in and say something?
Yeah, just a quick one. Yeah, for us, it's obviously, it's not going to be the same as if you're meeting in person. I think, like in the meeting from us as a union to our members or the local union reps. So we have used many different approaches to organizing in the past, you know, whether it's through newsletters or standing outside the office offering cake, you know, and some of that is impossible, some of it's still possible. But there are always going to be that special aspect of meeting someone in person that is missing, I think. And also we have had to like limit campaigning as well during this crisis, and I think yeah, it's a shame, but it's understandable as well, obviously.
And Carrie, sorry, I missed you as well. I'm being a bad host.
No problem. Thanks, Mike. We're living in a digitalized world, and this seminar and this talks can be watched by anybody from around the world. So I think it's important to notice that you know, we work everywhere. This is a global movement, and sometimes it might be difficult to start, especially during this COVID era. A lot of workers are inundated with the work, and they don't have time or energy maybe left to plan and execute organizing activities. But if you're working in the games industry, remember that there's no workplace too small or a company too big to start a union and to get organized. And we love to help you. We in Uni Global, we work everywhere in the world. We work directly with the unions. We provide support and training to unions, even in countries, you know, where unions have been almost non-existent for a long time, in countries in Eastern Europe, in the Balkan countries, and everywhere in the world. And we're seeing new unions being born all the time. Like we just had the Nexon Union being found up in South Korea. And if there is no union, or you don't know if there's a union, you can ask me, kari.lubeck@uniglobalunion.org, or any one of us in this panel. So this is, this is a global movement. There are no borders when it comes to workers getting unionized, and we all work together to create a better working environment in the games industry and get all the game workers unified in one front. So we're here for you.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I'll put everyone's contact details in a slide just after we finish speaking, and there'll be links to all of our websites, and assume everyone's got got a Twitter account as well. We'll put everything on there at the end, so you can contact any of us. And yeah, don't worry if you're not sure if there is a union in your country. We can any of us can point you in the right direction for that. And Kari's in a great position to do that. I mean, I know there's been some huge success stories in Romania where there hasn't been much organizing before, and they're really making waves. But yeah, if there's not a union, we can help you sort that out, and if there is, we can point in the right direction. And if the union is one of us, then we can get going straight away. So if you are in America, Ireland, Sweden, Switzerland, or Scotland, you can talk to one of us. Right, okay, I better wrap it up there, just so we don't go over time. Thanks to everyone on the panel for coming to do this. A few of you I just met for the first time, and it's been great, and it would have been not possible without this. It's been really interesting and useful to talk to you, and I really hope everyone watching this can take something out of it. And I think one of the things that's really come through this conversation is, one, that organizing is like a radically human act and an emotional act. Two, as Emma said, anyone can organize, just to make sure that's underlined. Even if you think you can't, or if you think it's not for you. We've all seen people from so many different walks of life, and from introverts, extroverts. Everyone really has something in them, and not everyone has to do the same job. There's so many things you can do as an organizer, and it's exactly the fact that you do have those differences that is the strength of the entire movement. It wouldn't be anything without you. To wrap it up, I was going to write an outro, but I just got a note here that says, if anyone's watching. That's not an outro, but I'm sure a bunch of people are. And thanks all for coming. I'll put all the links up to the end after this. But for now, goodbye, and enjoy the rest of PAX and EGX.